When you think of theme parks, you mainly think of Disneyland and all that Disney has to offer, where from 1955 then on, Disney has been the premier destination for resorts around the world. And every year, Disney contains the highest amount of attendance for any amusement park because no other place has quite frankly took you to another world like the one that Walt Disney was a genius in envisioning, entering worlds of fantasy, tomorrow, and the frontiers of America's past, present, and future. And in that process, Disney has introduced several different systems over the years to provide what they describe as the best way to help plan your day and make your trip more convenient. And that recent system introduced in the last 2 years is known as Disney Genie, a complimentary and convenient digital service designed to help create your best Disney day. And while such a system seems beneficial on the surface, it's actually more damaging the more you actually look into it. Something that seems more for me and less for thee, adding new roadblocks for many guests thinking they could get the best to spend the day at the park when it actually doesn't, and only benefits Disney in this situation to monetize skipping lines and distributing guests where they want them to go to get the most profit out of it. Because frankly, all it does, it actually decreases the reputation of the Disney parks themselves by actually making free systems now under a paid system that most of us can't even use nowadays. So as you guessed by the title of this video, we are going to take a look at Genie, charting its history, looking how to use the system, and explaining why you shouldn't actually use it at all, and the overall problem with it that damages the Disney brand, especially at a time during their 100th year of existence. All with the hope that this video is informative for you to actually make the right decision if you choose to come to places like Disneyland and try to encourage as many people as possible not to invest in it at all. At least the paid one in this case, since most of it is basically free. Because if there's one thing to know about me, and why I actually love Disney, is the fact of its theme parks itself, seeking to change it for the better so we can experience new things every single day. So with that said, I invite you to take a look at Disney's Genie, a convoluted mess.
So the first question you are wondering about right now, beside my brief overview, is what exactly is Genie for that matter? What does it do? And to answer that, we will take a look at its basic overview and then describe the short history up until this point in time of how Disney got to this terrible decision. Disney Genie service is a digital service offered in the Disneyland and My Disney apps for Walt Disney World and Disneyland resorts that is broken into 3 different sections, 2 of which are free and 1 is under a paywall that replaces the older FastPass system, as we will see. Where it is obviously based upon the character from Aladdin that was voiced by Robin Williams, the genie that grants us 3 wishes to our heart's desire under the tagline that you never had a friend like me, where he has surely become one of the most beloved Disney characters ever with Williams' incredible portrayal and impressions that make the character a timeless classic. But of course, that came at the cost of the time of conflict between Robin and Disney, where Robin Williams voiced the genie for Screen Actors Guild scale pay of $75,000 instead of his asking fee of $8 million, on the condition that his name or image not be used for marketing, and his character not take more than 25% of space on advertising artwork. But then again, for financial reasons, the studio went back on the deal on both counts, upsetting him because studio heads at the time like Jeffrey Katzenberg did not want him voicing 2 animated characters at the same time, where as a result, he did not reprise his role in the first sequel, Return of Jafar, until Jeffrey Katzenberg was replaced by Joe Roth as Walt Disney Studios chairman, where he made a public apology to Williams, where he then accepted that and voiced him in The King of Thieves as the final sequel, where in short, it was a deal of Disney wanting to save some and earn more money at that very time, where of course at this very point, they own the character and do what they wish with it, like using archival footage in Once Upon a Studio under Williams' estate permission, and so on and so forth, where it then led us to this point in time where Disney decided to use it for their new app, trying to offer this new system by of course using Genie for financial reasons, using the character to maximize their own service that consists of those 3 parts I just mentioned earlier. The 2 free ones are just called Disney Genie itself, and is part of their complimentary service portion comprising of a tip board, which to be honest is the only useful part of this service that shows you standby wait times for each attraction and dining options offered during the day with mobile order arrival windows that are useful to help plan where you want to go next during the day and forecasting what rides will be busy. The second part of the free portion is called My Genie Day, where it goes ahead and plans what you want to do according to your select attractions and entertainment options to save your time and make the most out of your day, under the tagline of course creating your best Disney day that updates itself as you actually go along. So when you do one attraction, it will do all the work for you to find the next best option in that area, where even though what you see on the surface sounds pretty good, it's actually the worst part of the entire system, as you will eventually see throughout the days we actually went. The other half, however, is the part where the real deals are actually delivered through the paid Genie Plus portion that replaced the old FastPass and MaxPass systems, where in short, for those who have actually attended Disneyland before COVID, is basically that paid MaxPass system you used on your phone, but it's just now the only option to get into the original FastPass system that used to be free to use, and now just named Lightning Lane, with of course also the added bonus of unlimited PhotoPass downloads, interactive augmented lenses that are totally useless, and of course audio tales for fun behind the scenes facts about the resort. The reason why people actually use it is access to that Lightning Lane to skip the line and head straight to the attraction to make it convenient for your visit to the park during the entire day. And the cost to buy into this system can vary time to time, mainly going up during the seasons, where its normal cost as of this recording is around $30 per guest and not per party. Per each individual if you want access to that very system, where when it originally started for both Disney World and Disneyland, it used to go around $15 to $20, but now increased the prices because Disney is Disney. And also added with that system was of course individual Lightning Lanes and virtual queues, the other two methods of attending attractions based upon the popularity of such attractions that I will get into later. So with that short overview of such a system, now comes the talk of how did we actually get here? Why does such a system like this exist in the first place? To answer this, we have to go back to the very beginning of Disneyland and work our way from there. Because as most of you actually know, Disneyland came from the idea of Walt Disney wanting to build a place where families can come and hang out together. A place that was unlike anything else in the world that delivered such meaningful experiences to remind us the value of space and how it could be used to our enjoyment. But of course, the first hurdle of this new venture was opening day itself, where as we all know at this point, everything sort of went the wrong way or another. Things just didn't look good with the amount of people who were there on opening day that caused super long lines amidst other things, which of course was a sign of things to come when we expect with lines and Disney to this very day. Long wait times to burden ourselves when we seek new experiences that only Disney could offer. Where over the years, newer rides and experiences were added to the parks, which more and more people would experience and increase the attendance and of course wait times overall. The time where Disney parks used the paid ticket system. When Disneyland opened in 1955, visitors purchased an admission ticket at the park at the main gate booths and then purchased a separate admission for each attraction. Attractions were then designated as A, B, or C attractions, and visitors either needed to purchase a specified coupon from a nearby booth or present the discount coupon book with the correct coupon attached. Where starting from the first letter was the more smaller and least popular attractions, where working up to E being of course the most popular, which we actually now reviews it to actually refer to such popular attractions today. Then of course, that entire system was phased out in the early 80s as other theme parks included their very rides within the price of admission, like Six Flags that opened at the same time as Disney World. This of course then led to the rise of the FastPass system introduced in 1999 as a virtual queue that you could use that people could actually get a pass using their park ticket at a select kiosk for free that gave you a return time for a certain hour of that specific ride while you would go out and enjoy other experiences and leave the rest to wait in a standby line. And like what you will see with Genie Plus, this was reserved for each individual ticket holder, where another FastPass could be obtained 2 hours after the last one was printed, even if the return time was further away. Like once you got into a ride and actually completed it, you could go to the next and get another FastPass for another return time during the day, and the cycle will repeat itself for how long until you were satisfied for that entire day. Where genuinely, when I was growing up, I did find this system very useful and convenient for when our family wanted to do stuff, as Disneyland was usually a once-a-year experience, fulfilling ourselves with our normal experiences that the park entails and keeping those fast passes as collectibles and memories of the time we actually went. A stamp in the era of Disney that has been covered extensively at this point, as I'm sure you're all well aware of Defunctland's video that actually charts the entire journey of the system and the complexities that actually reach into it. And from there, the system only grew as it was getting more popular with the rise of mobile phones, where by 2007, Disney filed the patent for using its SMS as a way to get and use FastPasses in their park, mainly of course by mobile. This then led to newer systems such as FastPass Plus for Disney World, and probably also the start of Disney just slapping Plus for when you experience their products like it actually meant something better. The best part of this was of course it being free also, which is wild for a Disney branded thing with Plus to actually be attached to, which incentivized a lot more people to use it to plan their vacations, allowing guests to reserve and plan a visit in advance to the parks at Walt Disney World for any major experience, and also allowed people to book it up 30 days in advance for average guests and 60 days for those staying on a Disney resort. Guests could actually make 3 reservations in advance for each day, and all 3 were required to be in the same theme park. They then had the option to make further reservations via in-park kiosks or the My Disney Experience app after they used their initial 3 selections subject to availability. The big problem of course was all this advanced planning, meaning you could run out very quick and was forced to do that within those 60 days if you actually wanted it. Sure, you could get a better experience out of that if you plan it compared to backtracking using the older FastPass system just to get a paper one just to return. But then again, all these systems just seemed like a bigger headache than needed to be despite it being so free. And then again, considering most of the focus of this very video will be subjected to Disneyland Resort itself, it's finally where we land on the final implementation of the original FastPass era and systems and the direct predecessor of the Genie Plus one, which of course was Disney's own MaxPass, a premium version of the FastPass that was accessed directly to your phone using the Disneyland app back in 2017 that actually worked in conjunction with the original FastPass system. This was started out as $10 a day, which was reasonable at the time considering you still could do the original system that was still completely free, where it just made much more sense for that to be implemented so that attractions wouldn't actually explode with longer wait times, only being able to use it while in the park and redeemed one FastPass at a time like they normally would. And like I just said, and what you will find out with Genie Plus, this system is literally the same exact thing, just rebranded into something different with a higher price tag and a deeply stupid system disguised as a free complimentary service. But to be honest with you, when me and my family actually went to Disney during this period of MaxPass, I actually genuinely liked it. It seemed much more convenient and easier to use as a paid add-on extra compared to doing the regular method of most of us guests have been accustomed to, where it really helped that Disneyland had that intimate feeling for a resort consisting only of 2 major parks that were easily accessible compared to an entire complex that was twice the size of Manhattan. This was also the same time that Disney introduced similar systems to their international resorts known as Disney Premier Access, basically the same thing as we know here in the States in the current iteration, believed to be introduced as a response to ticket scalping of physical paper FastPass tickets at Shanghai Disneyland, which of course was the other major problem FastPass went through the early ages and so on, but also quickly solved by how it was used day of and scanned within your own ticket. And in discussing all of this so far, you're probably wondering, why would they actually stop using such a system at all? What more could they do with a complex solution created to a simple problem? And what is the point if things like MaxPass are being used under a new name, and why remove the original FastPass system altogether if that was a part of the parks for well over 2 decades at the time? Well, to answer this, we have to go back to right before the pandemic hit in the year of 2019. This was the time Disney was experiencing its greatest year's success in terms of their films reaching over billions of dollars and the parks introducing their newly awaited Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. This section of the video involves, of course, the infamous former CEO of the Walt Disney Company, Bob Chapek, who previously held the position of chairman of Disney's Park Division, where when Disney's biennial event D23 was held, new changes were being discussed for the resorts, mainly in Disney World with the case with the changes to Epcot and also the introduction of a new digital offering at Walt Disney World, which of course, as you all know by the title of this video, was in fact Disney Genie.
Today we're going to announce a revolutionary new digital offering that will change the way that guests plan and experience for a trip to Walt Disney World. It's called Disney Genie. Disney Genie has capabilities that can help make the most out of your visit, whether you're a first-time guest or a seasoned pro. It will put customized itineraries geared towards your interest at your fingertips, cutting down on the need to plan and research. How about a Royal Princess themed day at Magic Kingdom? Maybe a trip around the world at Epcot, or even a perfect day for thrill seekers. And maybe you even know exactly what you want to do, but don't know exactly when you want to do it. Just tell Disney Genie what you want to experience for the day, and it will quickly evaluate millions of options to present you with an optimal plan. If you change your wish for any reason during the day, Disney Genie will help re-optimize your day. It will even send you real-time tips and updates, including recommendations for experiences that it thinks you'll love. And for those who don't want to worry about making dining and FastPass reservations in multiple steps, Genie will take care of it for you.
Basically, with what you just heard, Disney Genie in its earlier stages was just a free version of a system we briefly covered and only used for Walt Disney World at the time to come in late 2020, where it also seemed like it had more features to it to present to guests what kind of Disney day they specifically wanted, but then toned down a bit to focus more on the FastPass integration later on, which as you just heard uttered by Chapek, was still going to be FastPass at the time for this resort, thinking MaxPass and FastPass at Disneyland would still probably remain within their current configurations as that is more easier to manage. But unfortunately, unfortunately, this still came at a time like 2019, where I'm sure you all know the story of what happened at the start of the new decade. Because in 2020, Bob Chapek was promoted to CEO as Iger was stepping down after launching Disney Plus, and COVID-19 was getting much closer to the States at the time when their international parks in China were being shut down. A completely non-suspicious move at a time where in March 2020, Disneyland and Disney World were eventually shut down as the pandemic hit the United States, where they would not reopen until a year later in April of 2021. And such a time could only result in such a big loss for a studio focused on entertainment where most people would have to actually go out, only limiting ourselves to watching Disney Plus and only buying merchandise online amidst other things. And in that period was a unique opportunity for Disney to go ahead and change things they would have otherwise found more difficult if they were still open, where eventually and inevitably some things were going to be charged one way or another. One of which was the original Genie system we just talked about that was scheduled for that late 2020 release, but this time instead of just being for Disney World and a brand new complimentary service to tailor to your daily needs, it would also be offered to both Disneyland and Disney World, and decided to restrict that FastPass service to Genie to do most of that work, trying to actually get the most money because, you know, they lost money during this time. Instead of getting rid of it, they managed to find a way to monetize it to their advantage and control who enters the park, virtually the same thing as paying for those individual attractions in Disneyland's past, but more optional at this point as it might seem. And this was all added at the time Disney had overall rethink how attending their theme parks were going to be like, added of course with the reservation system that was all done for the comforting of select guests as said by Chapek in this interview here about a month before he was actually eventually fired.
We want to guarantee a great guest experience no matter when people come. If they come the second Tuesday in September, we want them to have a great guest experience. Maybe that wouldn't be so hard in the past, but if they come the day after Thanksgiving, we also want to guarantee that they're going to have a great experience. The people who actually come into the park that day, we want them to have a great experience so that no matter what day you come, you are guaranteed to get that magical experience that creates magical memories that last a lifetime. In a world where we don't control demand, you're left with one of two situations. You either let way too many people into the park where they don't have a great experience, or you manage it by just turning people away at the gate. Now imagine if you're a family from Seattle and you come to Disneyland, you come for a 2 or 3 day stay, you're there at 10 o'clock in the morning and you're turned away because we won't let too many people in the park. So what we developed during the COVID shutdown is a reservation system so we can plan like every other business out there, like an airline, hotel, cruise industry. We developed a reservation system so people would know ahead of time whether they were going to get in or not. And then we practiced yield management, which every other company in the world can do, so that we have pricing be a reflection of how many people we can actually let in and still guarantee that great experience. So for some of our fans, that's heresy, but I think it's not only good business practice in terms of maximizing shareholder value, but more importantly, it protects the guest experience so that when you get into the park, you can have confidence it's not going to be overcrowded.
So basically what was being described in this interview a month before he was rightfully ousted was the fact that COVID brought in a new opportunity to control who comes into the parks through this entire reservation system, trying to bring in less people to manage such crowds and increase guest satisfaction, where when you think about it on the surface actually seems very disingenuous, but then also reminded that this is done to a business perspective which was understandable at a time like COVID affecting how society was to re-emerge, but then rendered a bit more useless and prohibitive as the situation seemed more resolved. And this is something we have to dive into this section of the video, as it is the first major hurdle that comes within coming to the parks compared to the previous one that had FastPass, where both Genie and reservations do go hand in hand in how the new modern Disney operates itself. Once again in this section, we will focus solely on Disneyland, as by early 2024, regular park tickets at Disney World will no longer require reservations and as more date-based tickets by that point, which one can only hope that Disneyland would follow suit, as this practice has limited Disney from where it used to be before the pandemic, as this was something introduced specifically within the pandemic. So with that said, what exactly is a theme park reservation? Well, this one is actually also quite simple based on the fact that it is a reservation you make to attend a certain theme park, where before you actually didn't have to do it all and actually just buy the tickets to simply enter, where now as of this recording, you have to select the specific date that you plan to attend in order to go, for them to actually smoothen the process for when you will go so the parks won't go over capacity, as the saying might go when we know it's actually not. And depending on what type of ticket you get, prices actually start to vary, but generally only increase as time goes on, such as the recent October ticket price increase. For starters, single-day tickets are under this tiered system that was introduced in 2020, one that goes from 0 to 6 for select dates depending on the season and time, 0 obviously being the cheapest and 6 being the more expensive one, which one can actually easily see by looking at the calendar for the price of the ticket of the day you would actually want to go. The reason I talk about this is because it's still a part of this unnecessary dumb system that they have been doing with these reservations. The other versions of this are of course the standard multi-day tickets, which is normally the price you actually see on the screen and doesn't change on certain days, just like this singular one. To plan this trip, I obviously had to use this one and of course the option of Park Hopper to allow myself to visit both parks during the day, which under the reservation system makes you select the park you actually like to reserve as your first starting point and then hop over at 11 AM or whatever time you actually find fit, compared to before where you can actually go to any park at any time. No limit to where you actually wanted to go first, where it just doesn't make sense to do so now considering that California Adventure is a park that is still considered the lesser park and has only gotten about half of Disneyland's total attendance at its highest peak at this point. Remembering that this entire system is trying to control how many people will be able to get in with the ticket for a select day, even when it seems like it's counterproductive to the ultimate goal of what a theme park is supposed to be when somebody is trying to make money as much as possible by having as many people as possible to spend their dollars, where it just doesn't make any sense why it has to be there at all at this point instead of adding headaches to any consumer's experience. Where when you actually think about it, it does actually go against the ideals of Walt Disney himself, where he made places like Disneyland for the family to hang out, wanting as many people as possible to experience this new venture he created, where nowadays they add this extra unnecessary step to not only limit but also increase the satisfaction of the few who actually do come. I mean, this isn't necessarily hard for anyone to do as long as they actually have a plan, as everyone should actually come in when you want to get to Disney, but it just wasn't long ago that we actually didn't need to do that, and of course passing COVID at this point. It's a burden that doesn't need to exist for a place that's obviously supposed to be burden free, where it constantly can change on this very site, where an entire day at Disneyland could possibly show as not available for reservations as it was sold out, but then change the same day to show that it actually still is available, creating this confusion of those who actually want to get in if people actually canceled their tickets or whatnot that the system would normally entail. And keep in mind, I'm only just a guess and these are my personal opinions, where there are many other factors that could actually explain it, which I don't doubt are actually very understandable, but I just don't understand at this certain point that people are actually able to go to the maximum mobility, that they decide to actually do this and actually limit the actual experience that you can get that encourages people to spend more money. And this is also more hectic to the fact that blockout dates can also apply, especially for those who actually subscribe to their annual pass system, which is mainly for local residents who live near the resort and frequently go to the parks, where before it generally was named the annual pass and that most people can go for a yearly price tag over $1,000 that varied from time to time, where it is now named Magic Key passes ranging from $500 for California residents to $1,600, for which a few discounts are offered with the required theme park reservations that are subject to availability of such reservations allocated to the Magic Key passes and applicable pass blockout dates, which as of this recording also is still not available to purchase, being paused because of the fact that they are doing this limited system to shut people out, because their current system with the tickets are actually more profitable at this point. Another inconvenience because they really want to save costs in reality to having average guests pay more with the theme park tickets they know that come once a year and buy more merchandise amidst other things. Oh, and to pile even more misery finally in this section is the fact that early entry is only offered to guests who stay on-site Disney hotels, where Disneyland opens a bit early for the guests about 30 minutes prior to opening with select attractions available, where if you know anything, then you would know that these specific Disneyland hotels are expensive, where some could even range twice as much as what you would usually spend on theme park tickets alone, which is something compared yet again to the previous system where they offered it on select days for Disneyland only at the time, and it was called Magic Mornings that offered 1 hour before opening of the very same thing, the reflection of modern Disney providing less and less for a higher price tag. But who am I to say this? This is mainly my opinion about it, of course, where some can actually like it and some can hate it. Everything can go either way in this video, which is very much encouraged. But anyways, besides that, and back to the point of making these theme park reservations, is where we actually finalize things off, where it offers us the chance to actually put add-ons before our trip, including a voucher for parking instead of paying at the parking, which is honestly very useless for most guests who actually come all over the world, and of course also buying Genie Plus. This is one of the two ways that you could get into the system besides doing it from the app app yourself. As you can see, it already contains the total value of Disney Genie per day that you would normally do in the app that goes along with your reservation for those select days that you choose. But for someone like me, that adds too much now and would be best to do it the day of if you feel like it, considering what you would see that will come out of this system. And with those steps out of the way, we are finally ready to begin our journey and descent into Genie. Now, the reason I chose Disneyland as my prime Genie candidate rather than the more larger and complex Walt Disney World Resort is because I already know it well enough at this point, coming since I was only a year old, and the fact I live much more closer by it being only about 3 hours away from my home compared to going to Florida, where I just simply did not have the money to do so. Remembering, I had also made a trip to Disneyland earlier in this year when I was making my video discussing the downfall of corporate Disney, explaining the issues with the current management that also affected its parks for more money. And of course, the other fact, as I mentioned earlier, was that being Max Pass was virtually the same as Genie Plus, so that experience would remain similar to how someone actually might use it to their advantage, and one I've already known thus far. So in this instance, I booked a trip to Disneyland during the holiday season in December, right before Christmas, knowing it would be around 2 years since Genie was first introduced in December of 2021, and of course anticipating a much more busier season because of the fact that most families would be off during the December holiday. Unfortunately with this, I did not get to record as much of myself as possible on video because it actually rained heavily on the last day that I actually wanted to do so when I was there, cutting some of the trip short, but also saved by the fact I didn't need Plus by the 3rd day I actually attended. In order to do this trip, I reserved Disneyland for my first day, DCA for my second, and of course back to Disneyland for anything I missed out or what I actually wanted to relax and do from that point forward. I mean, in this aspect, I really do respect the reservation system, giving enough time for people to plan what they should do first in the park to spend the most time before deciding to hop over to do the actual next. In this way, we can actually manage the most of the attractions offered under Genie Plus and the recommendations that are offered under My Genie Day. In this part, we actually have to start planning under this system and what it actually recommends us to do for the first time we actually enter into our day of the park. We begin this by summoning our party so that they contain the same plan for all of us according to what we want to do this very day, choosing to select various attractions and entertainment options in this part for what we want to do. In this particular recording, I only selected various attractions that I would want to do for that day, where you can only choose a maximum of 5 so that you don't overload the system of actually planning what it wants to do, which to be honest is just very stupid and goes against planning out an entire day when some people who spend less time in the park for a day or two would really want to do the most out of it, and having a limit to that actually contradicts the entire purpose of people who actually want to do that system in the first place, to get everything done because they don't come here often, and the first reason why multiple channels and multiple people decide not to use it or recommend it at all. Just counterintuitive to any plan you want to do when you know you could do much more than what the system actually offers or limits you to contain. The second part of this plan is more redundant because they mainly advertise this part as something that is there if you don't know exactly what you want to do. If you don't know which place to go or what to actually eat at any time of the day, where for someone like me, I really just don't need to do that when I already selected at this portion of the app and already knew what the hell I actually wanted to do. I mean, why should I continue using this step as they describe in this particular video if I already had the option to select what I want? And what point does it actually serve for those who actually have utilized it before, knowing where they need to go throughout the day for Disney or anything else? It just doesn't make sense to do so or make people choose twice when we know that actually does nothing for you throughout the day. If you choose one attraction on this side and you choose the same thing for another option of what you want to do, it just makes it a little bit more redundant, as you could see, because you didn't need to add that in the first place because you already had that in your first plan. But anyways, according to Disney themselves, that doesn't matter when Genie actually puts all of these recommendations together with their own system to actually plan where you need to go first. And because of that, this is the first hurdle we have to show from beginning to end, where we go from the park opening to the park closing to complete our day and utilize the tools we have at our disposal. These tools include grabbing Genie Plus as well to include every single major attraction within our itinerary to what we want to do, whether it be the ones we selected on Genie or the rest that are included within the resort's offerings. This includes 20 attractions total for Disneyland, 12 of which are located at Disneyland itself, and the remaining are featured at Disney's California Adventure. This of course is the main way we will experience such attractions under the 4 main ways that we can actually do so to how we go about our day, including standby being simply waiting in line like most do, Lightning Lane including Genie Plus and the individual ones that are available to purchase, virtual queues that replace standby to board attractions at certain times that are only offered at Disney World at this point, and single rider for of course riding by by yourself. And to start this, we are able to start doing so when we go into the park about 45 minutes before opening, where they let you into the gates of Disneyland before they get ready, and of course allowing early entry guests into the select areas. This then allows us to purchase Genie Plus and gives us the results under our Genie Day as well. But something I'm not going to use quite yet, as there is something important to mention about in this part right here.
So this is the first part of the day, so we don't use anything like Genie Plus at all. When we first start, this is the part of the day when the park first opens, and it's called using the rope drop strategy. This part, guests can actually choose wherever they want to go. They can either go to Fantasyland, ride all the attractions there, go to Frontierland, ride attractions like Big Thunder Mountain, go to Adventureland, try Indiana Jones and any other thrill ride in that portion, and the entrance to Rise of the Resistance for those guests going in that direction. Now for us, we are going to take the simple route and go to Tomorrowland over here and do Space Mountain. This way, we could start our day the most effective way possible and see one way how to use the system without Genie's tips, because frankly, you shouldn't be using that system when it first starts in the morning. It's very inconvenient, and it actually makes your day much more worse, because it will send you to attractions with low wait and low times that you can easily attend after you're done with the main attractions you want to do. So with that said, this is Rope Drop.
So in speaking about Rope Drop when the park opens at 8 AM and people go to wherever they need to go, is where we first look at the Genie app itself and see what they offer throughout the day. The one I just mentioned we don't need to use at the park first opens, heading to the busier thrill rides like Space Mountain that will collect as the day actually rolls on. As you can see for our first day at Disneyland, Genie's recommendations include us going to places like Pirates of the Caribbean when the park first opens at 8 AM, and then to the Haunted Mansion the next hour, before trekking all the way to Toontown to ride Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway by exactly 10 AM. And this is the first clue that shows us how inconvenient and utterly stupid Disney's Genie is, despite what they say is designed to accommodate your needs for the entire day to make it easier and more efficient. Instead of the thrill rides I selected for this day as a top priority like Space Mountain, Indiana Jones, and Rise of the Resistance, it chose to go for the slower dark rides as the thing we actually need to do first thing in the morning. And that, quite frankly, is not the best strategy to follow ever, when you have already seen me explain that you go wherever you need to go for the first thing at Rope Drop to attractions that you know will get busier as the park fills up with guests during the day. The ones I specifically selected for this day were actually put out way later in the day as something that we could do at that point, because of the fact it takes into account the forecasted wait times that they themselves use when a ride would actually be busy, a bar graph that can either go up or down based on actual attraction data for the day. Where I'll just tell you right now, this is actually a pretty useless feature that actually serves you no purpose for the day when you actually know that rides will generally have the same busy wait times for most of the day using the wait screen that shows you those times. It tells you absolutely nothing based upon fluctuating data that can't be useful at all for when you actually want to find out the time to ride, and then on that actually might change. And speaking of pirates in this situation for our starting ride, it just doesn't make sense to do so considering that this attraction is not offered under Lightning Lane at all and is completely standby that moves continuously with a maximum wait time I saw about at 35 minutes throughout the day. Where in attractions like this, you can actually board very soon where it just moves along and you don't actually stop. It just is an efficient system because of how many boats they have and how many people can actually sit and actually ride the ride. Where you cannot justify yourself using it right now because it isn't quite busy yet compared to something you know that will, like Space Mountain itself, and the fact that the system wants you to go to Haunted Mansion for the next hour, but then wants to make you make an entire trip halfway across the park from New Orleans Square just to get to Toontown and ride Railway, where that amount of walking just wastes so much time if you wanted to do something else, like eat, where this recommends us to do so at 2:05 PM, which is just too far from my typical lunchtime and even breakfast as I would want to do during that same area. So instead here, we decide to rope drop Space Mountain and rush here while still walking to the ride in order to get onto the attraction with such a low standby at this point in the day when we first open, which in fact is the same idea all these other people have in front of me during this time of the day, giving more reason to actually complete it when we know this ride can get actually super busy. Like on the last day I was there, it actually went up over 100 minutes at the peak time, which is not a good sign at all if you were desperate to actually ride this attraction. But what really pained me about this part was the fact that I saw Lightning Lane being offered at this time during the opening of the park. Because once you purchase Genie Plus when you are in the park, mainly about 30 minutes before opening, you are able to select your first reservation for where you actually want to go for the first hour if that is offered. Compared to say the original paper FastPass system where you would actually go to the kiosk and get a printed return time later on in the day when you actually arrived at the attraction to do so to actually ride it, that was actually completely free. Genie now allows us to do so when we begin our day the first thing in the morning up until closing. And why you actually saw me here record people getting into the Lightning Lane despite it only being 8 AM at the time of this recording, when the standby will be moving quite as fast at the point when the first guests come in. Now sure, you probably might say it would be more faster and convenient to avoid the mess that most of us would be in here on the right side, but I'm going to actually prove you wrong, laying out some important ground rules about Genie Plus Lightning Lane selections. This consists of the first rule being similar to FastPass being the 2-hour rule. Meaning once you make a reservation for the first ride you do, you cannot make another selection for another attraction until those hours are up or until you actually redeem your current Lightning Lane for when it is time to ride the attraction. So when we make one at 8 AM when the park opens, we have to wait till 10 AM to get to the next or soon after we redeem our current run since it's right there. The second one is actually the most important, being the fact that you can only have one Lightning Lane per attraction to use per day. Meaning once you use it, you lose it because you already had done so, in order for them to make the system more fair to guests who actually might want to purchase such a thing throughout the day and not run out where if you want to ride it again. Where if you want to ride it again, you have to go back to the standby line like everyone else and wait the allotted time, unless via an individual Lightning Lane purchase that would actually be offered. So using that knowledge, you can actually see why this is actually stupid and inefficient for any guest at this moment to redeem their selected attraction because they cannot ride it again throughout the day. Where the fact still remains, it is too early to do so, where more people should actually follow the advice online if they want the best way to spend their money by using this. Where you can see how those who actually have used it at this point cannot actually use it again to ride. Unlike the people here in the standby line who actually entered the attraction like us, will be able to actually redeem it later in the day or ride it when it's less busy. An unfortunate misstep that Disney actually exploits to spend more of your money, knowing the fact that you might carry some FOMO for an attraction even if the standby is relatively short for the opening hour. Most people actually just use it because they know they can, but also the fact that they might miss out on an opportunity later in the day if they actually have the opportunity to ride it right now. Like it even shouldn't exist for that hour because most of us who open the park use the rope drop strategy to complete the rides that we know get full later in the day. Because you also have to remember that you pay about $30 per person at this point in time in order to use it for the full day that also fluctuates, and you need to spend all of that time well. Because of the fact that I also know that nobody will quite frankly care about the other two options that this service actually entails. But besides that, we continue with Space Mountain as the first ride of the day because of the fact I know it's more reliable during park opening to continue operating first thing, compared to say others like Indiana Jones or Big Thunder Mountain that can suffer more breakdowns quite frequently and actually be closed the first thing in the morning, making it to the actual attraction about around or under 5 minutes at this time of the day when we actually rode it. Very simple and very convenient, and I did not have to use Genie at all that told me to use something else at that point in time. Where from that point forward, we can actually make it to our next big thrill coaster being the Matterhorn that is still within the early minutes of the 8 AM hour where attractions wouldn't be as busy, where lo and behold, Matterhorn was roughly the same time as Space Mountain with a maximum of 5 minutes to wait when we quickly got on and off the attraction. And at that same point in time, Genie's recommendations in that free portion of the app still do not change at this point even if we made it over to this part of the day. Relatively, it will stay on the same course regardless of you getting on another attraction thinking it's the best way to help plan your day. Yes, it can change with those continuous updates as you've seen earlier in the video, but not quite yet when we first started the day of Disneyland's opening. And how the entire Genie system we have right now is not the actual proper choice for people who want to become thrill seekers like us to actually ride the rides. Another negative point for Chaybec here, when the original system was actually promised to help plan out a specific Disney day depending on what we want, including that thrill seeker he mentioned, where it actually does the complete opposite because it wants to disperse guests to certain areas to control crowds. Once again, the system is advertised as making your day easier and more efficient going to this place and then over here, but the reality is with this fact is the fact that it makes it more complicated and ineffective, especially for someone like me and my friend who want to ride the thrills that would actually usually become the busiest at this point in time. It is just solely for the purpose purpose of making money for them by having each attraction spread out between an hour so that you can probably buy some merch or food along the way. Because the truth is that there is no real purpose for you to actually walk these long distances unless you really wanted to do something that was over there on that side. I mean, it makes sense for a Haunted Mansion holiday and then take the railroad over there that's by the attraction to get to Toontown on that side without walking, but it still is a trip where you could have done something else around the same time without actually getting into that area. Being in the same area would actually be more convenient if you wanted to ride attractions like Indiana Jones and so forth that isn't quite as far as Mickey and Minnie's, or the other side where Rise of the Resistance isn't too far down, as we will get into later. But from this point, we finally make our way to Big Thunder Mountain to complete the roller coaster circuit at Disneyland during the first hour of 8 AM.
So now we have reached the almost end of our first hour at Disneyland. We have ridden 2 attractions and avoided the advice of Disney's Genie. And as you can see, they were very short, only about 15, even less than 15 minutes, because Disney usually inflates the wait times of several different attractions. And now we're riding Big Thunder Mountain because we have ample time to ride it at this moment in the park. Because, as you find out, people still use Lightning Lane at this hour, which is not recommended at all. But for us, what we're doing is showing you the correct way of riding attractions. And you don't need to use Genie Plus at all. Not until later in the park, as you'll see.
So after I finished recording that part, the total amount of time we spent in Big Thunder Mountain was around 10 minutes, as you can see by the recording around here. It made sense why it felt a tad bit longer compared to the previous 2, because we had already accomplished those 2 rides to start the day, and more people would be lining up as the attractions were fully opened. During that same time frame, we also went to book our first attraction using Genie Plus Lightning Lane, which was Indiana Jones. It made sense to do so at this time because the wait time was already piling in at about 30 minutes during this time of the hour. Granted, that meant we had to wait about 2 hours from 8 AM to reach that point, but it just made more sense to do so and ride another attraction in the standby and probably get something to eat during that same downtime. The best part of this is of course chewing up some time here in the standby queue for another attraction right here before we head on to our next adventure. It makes the wait more bearable to where you actually want to go. Where I tried my best to record some footage of the rides before you until I actually felt it wasn't safe to do so, and I put my phone away before something bad were to actually happen. Something you'll notice as we get onto other rides due to their intensity, but I did my best as I could so you can enjoy something like this right here. But like I said, we managed to complete the circuit of Disneyland's major coaster attractions for the day because of the fact we only waited in the standby for each of them during the first hour, which of course, if you remember by the rules, we are still able to redeem our Lightning Lane for each of those attractions later in the day, as you will see. Because generally, this day we were at Disneyland, using Genie Plus was actually quite effective for the thrill seeker portion that we were aiming to complete that was all done without using Genie at all. I mean, yes, we did use Genie to check times, but not actually follow the shit advice from the My Genie Day portion of the app. But considering we have other options for our day to do during the downtime before we head over to Indiana Jones at 10:20 AM, we decided to head over to Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, as that option had been scheduled around the same time frame. And during this time of the day, it really doesn't quite get that busy as you might think. So it is better to actually try and complete such an attraction that is still relatively new, that only opened in January of 2023. But the most surprising thing out of all of this is that despite it actually having Lightning Lane, it still generally moves quite fast for such an attraction in the standby queue because of one simple thing that I will explain right here.
So as we can see, we are in Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, one of the best Disney standby queues ever designed, where you can see so much Disney history happening right before our eyes. This is one of those attractions where you don't need Lightning Lane to actually use at all, because if you use Lightning Lane, you skip all the actual cool Mickey Mouse memorabilia that you could ever find throughout the history of the attraction, such as this one area tributing the Mickey and Mickey Mouse Clubhouse, and of course 70s Mickey. Same thing can happen a popcorn concession stand, and of course the newer Mickey Mouse shorts like Potato Land.
This attraction was truly designed as a tribute to Mickey Mouse in the new reopened Toontown, hence why it has so much history that I tried to explain right here. It fits the theme and purpose of what it represents, where the attraction's large interior design in the former backstage area of Disneyland behind Toontown allows more room to fit more people, including using your typical switchbacks added with the bonus of Mickey Mouse throughout the years, from Steamboat Willie, Fantasia, The Prince and the Pauper, Clubhouse, and so forth, like I just said when we entered the cartoon world with Goofy and ride the attraction. In that regard, depending on what type of day it is, you can choose to follow the advice of Genie in this portion, remembering it is still different for any type of guest depending on what selection you actually get, but still relatively the same where it doesn't actually provide you with anything useful for where you want to specifically go. A virtual waste of time and energy on Disney's part for making something so convoluted nobody wants to use. But still, overall, the attraction is fun because it is the second trackless ride introduced to the Disneyland Resort after Rise of the Resistance, which is fun despite it being majorly filled with screens that still make sense for the cartoon. One of the fun things about this ride is the fact that the ride vehicles can change position when it goes to the railroad portion yet again because of the trackless nature of the ride, meaning wherever you load into the train, you can end up either in the back or the front of it. Where this recording I did was during my last trip, where I didn't actually feel like the need to record it again, but still missed out the fact that the overall trip I did for this video is where we ended up in the front of the train with Goofy, so that was an actual neat feature. And after that, we decided to head back towards Indiana Jones, getting another quick snack to bite and then checking out the new Adventureland Treehouse, the simple yet best feature that Walt Disney Imagineering had ever produced at this point in time, harkening back to the original Swiss Family Robinson Treehouse for what this attraction says is inspired by in the original movie again, from that point where it was actually known as Tarzan's Treehouse. Now, once again, I recorded most of this footage of the treehouse at night because it is frankly more beautiful then and reminds us that Disney does have potential to produce such great original non-IP-led content and anything else if they actually set their minds to it, but it just doesn't exist because executively the company is failing to actually understand what actually got them here in the first place. And then after that experience, we begin our journey towards Indiana Jones and make use of our very first lightning lane of the day. But before we get into that part, we need to explain how we properly use it compared to the older FastPass system, the one that we used to have the printed return time and come back to the same queue and bring it to the cast member to ride in the expedited place, where nowadays there are two different ways that we can enter when the actual time comes.
Now here we're standing by the entrance of Indiana Jones, and this is where we show the two ways of actually getting into Lightning Lane, how we actually use it. The first way is to use your phone and actually scan your ticket to actually get in. The second way is to use the Magic Band and scan by there. And Magic Band Plus is another new technology that was introduced at Disneyland just in 2022 alone.
And in mentioning that, you're probably asking right now, what exactly is a Magic Band that I briefly showed to you? Well, Magic Bands are RFID bracelets that are offered at Disney World and Disneyland, connecting certain data to guests for certain experiences. It was introduced in 2013 by Disney's former COO, Tom Staggs, who was already ahead of the park division before Chapek actually became a part of that, a part of the My Magic Plus experience that was offered at Disney World. This included connecting park tickets, hotel room keys, payments, and PhotoPass information to the Magic Bands, and so on, that would make the trip more convenient to the guests. That was actually explained here during the Wall Street Journal segment on wearables by different companies.
I have one.
Explain it to people what it's going to do exactly.
So as the video said, this will substitute for your park pass, your hotel room ticket, your fast pass access. So all the entitlements that you have at the parks, this will enable. And so first of all, it gets 6-10 pieces of paper out of your hand as you're trying to navigate through things. But I think, as importantly, this allows us to unlock more special things for you, depending on how and what level you want to participate.
And of course, that was the early implementation of the features that were only originally offered to Walt Disney World Resort in the first and second stages, where just like I said, it finally got offered to Disneyland in 2022 under the Magic Band Plus feature, which include things like making your trip more convenient, like scanning to enter in the theme parks instead of physical tickets, or using your phone, using the Lightning Lane interest that I just showed you, special bounty hunting challenges in Galaxy's Edge, and of course, enhanced park experience when the Magic Band actually lights up during showtimes of shows like the World of Color. Oh, and last but not least, of course, linking your PhotoPass photos to your account being much more easier. Where you're probably wondering right now, Is it actually useful to get at this moment? Well, the answer to that question right now would be no, to be frank, because it's more of a gimmick at Disneyland at this point, with limited features where its only useful parts consist of those 2 easier options to scan that only saves about 30 more seconds if you manage to pull out your phone and remember to pull out the stops before entering, where the other features of the system are just cool bonuses that don't really add much to the experience, unlike what has been implemented at Disney World for over a decade at this point, where it clearly needs more time to develop to add more features before people would actually buy into this system. A system that has such a complex history that has already been documented at this point that you should also check out before actually diving right in. Where of course, I should also encourage you not to buy this at all at this point unless they actually update it with more features extending to the hotel or mobile orders and whatnot to make the trip more interactive within the park or even more useful in that way. Because once you're away from the park, it basically becomes a collectible until you return to Disney for your next vacation, all for a price tag of about $35 to $70-ish depending on the designs you can get. Ones that you can't return at all once you buy it, which I'm actually going to do so again because I'm just that pathetic because I like some of those designs. But back to the trip at hand is where we finally get to ride Indiana Jones Adventure, one of the more busier attractions at Disneyland and one of the greatest marvels of Walt Disney Imagineering that pulls you into the world of the movie and right into the temple. Now the biggest part to learn about this ride is the fact that the Lightning Lane entrance is just allowing you to skip the outdoor portion of the entire queue that you see on my left side, because once they allow a certain amount in, they let standby outside in the temple as well into that line, which virtually becomes 1. Because from here, you have to travel from the outdoor portion by the temple itself and deeper towards the show building. For example, using this overview on Google Earth, you start out from there and then make your way towards this huge green building that is cleverly disguised by the interior work of the queue and the overall atmosphere of Adventureland itself. I mean, pretty genius, but another point to show you how this is virtually paying to cut the line in front. I mean, not all rides are like this when they actually have 2 separate queues or such, but they just add more to other guests who don't actually pay for it if an attraction is fairly popular. I also forgot to add in my 2-way portion earlier in that video is that you can also redeem the Lightning Lane for the attraction about 5 minutes prior, or even a little bit sooner depending on what time you're actually at, as we tested ourselves to get on the ride and virtually redeem our next one to get out. I mean, in this case, earlier is better because we are able to make our next selection the sooner, and especially because of the long walk you take from inside out in an attraction like Indiana Jones. Because if you remember what we showed you earlier in the attraction is the fact that after you complete it, you have to get off and go back the way you came. Other attractions might make you exit another separate area depending on the size of what it entails, but this one actually makes you go back the same long route we just showed you, considering that the show building is outside the normal park boundaries, which of course completes our very first trip using Lightning Lane. And going back outside to our genie list, we see that this attraction was supposed to be completed near our 11:35 AM hour of the park, but we managed to do it much more earlier at 10:20 to make the first selection, where instead looking at the tip board, we booked Millennium Falcon Smuggler's Run as our next ride that we were able to redeem prior to Indiana Jones, as our 2 hours were only up for the 11 AM hour. And this is one of those attractions that has those separate lines for us Lightning Lane, which actually makes it much more easier to board from that very process, boarding the Millennium Falcon and all that entails, which is very fun before you start going on. So heading over there, I actually got to be the right-hand pilot, going up and down and controlling lightspeed, which was a ton of fun. And in this part, I would just like to say that this attraction could be better and add more missions to it rather than the one adding more replayability and value like Star Tours has with the interactive element of changing shows. Such attractions do have so much potential, but not enough, including only one major linear path forward. The other point where Disney provides the minimum base experience but never actually expands on that point because they were banking on this one new era being super successful but ultimately backfiring on them since their middling reception. Don't get me wrong, this is an actual fun attraction, but there just should have been more involved in that in the meantime. Where after that, and because of the fact we made our redemption at the 11 AM hour, we were able to book another selection and chose Haunted Mansion Holiday for the way back from Galaxy's Edge, making better use of the entire system, completing about 6 rides during the first half of the day before going to get to the next, which was virtually half the attractions under the Genie Plus system offered at Disneyland. And as you can see, attractions like Haunted Mansion do tend to run a bit more busy as they are under the holiday overlay of such attractions. As you will see in this video, rides like Haunted Mansion and Small World are slower dark rides that normally do not get too busy during the regular season, but because of their seasonal overlays and offerings that only come once during this time of the year, they actually have an added wait time to them because people want to see the new additions, incentivizing those who actually want to redeem Lightning Lanes, including us, to actually use in this situation. Some rides just carry such rich history that you cannot actually disclude that from your trip because of how iconic they have been to the park history and legacy, where lines will be long regardless of its type, being a much more slower Omnimover system that usually moves along more continuously. And beyond this point was generally the last attraction in this half before we had to do a short rest and recharge our phones to continue on, to get some good lunch like clam chowder in the bread bowl and a mint julep. And after taking that rest, we decided to head back at around 2 PM and try to start planning yet again about what attraction to ride, taking a nice stroll around the park where we once again decided to pull up the app, which unfortunately I did not record that point because we were able to go back and ride attractions we did earlier like Big Thunder Mountain, which I did beforehand. Testing out the attraction we rode earlier in the day, now being able to use the Lightning Lane as a bonus during the day, remembering we already accomplished half the attractions offered on your Genie Plus with time to spare with that standby queue instead, and knowing we have yet to redeem our Lightning Lane for such. But then of course, this actually happened.
So as you can see right now, we are in our second half of the day after we returned from the hotel. This time we booked an experience for Big Thunder Mountain again to ride on Genie Plus and Lightning Lane. But as you can see right now, the attraction is closed due to maintenance issues. This is something that happens of course regularly to Disneyland, where several different attractions can be closed no matter what might happen. It frequently happens often now to Disneyland ever since COVID actually happened, which actually makes us question what is happening to the management decisions here. But during that time, we get to actually redeem another attraction to book, just like we see here with Star Tours The Adventures Continue. That means we have to make our way back and ride a new attraction as that alternative.
So, like I said, this is something that happens quite frequently at Disneyland for many different attractions, experiences that can go down quite often due to those issues, which frankly does serve as a hindrance for anyone's plans, as you can see in this short video, where I recorded some of the cast members telling the guests the same thing you saw me say here, when we now have the option to redeem another attraction to complete, which was Star Tours in that case, and not quite that far from the time I actually booked Big Thunder Mountain. So we just headed straight towards the attraction and went on to ride it while managing to book our next Lightning Lane, being of course Small World Holiday, the other half I just showed that was important from the holiday overlay section. In this part, Star Tours was about 40-ish minutes for the normal standby queue on the other side, while boarding the simulator here was about 10 minutes, taking into account the entire pre-show that came before it, being able to experience the ride using sequel trilogy movies for this actual portion of the attraction. I hadn't rode it in quite a while, and they did a variety of planets from the prequels and originals for the rebooted Star Tours, where they mainly turned this once iconic attraction that George Lucas created himself into an ad for their newest TV shows to keep it more fresh and whatnot, to fit the newer scenes for the ride depending on the time of the season. I mean, it is fun to keep it fresh, but for me, knowing the fact that this is Tomorrowland that had a variety of unique themes based upon the optimistic outlook of the future that Walt Disney had, like for such attractions like Space Mountain, and the fact that Star Wars has its own complete land with better attractions that spun off of this ride alone, meant it was kinda time to actually end this ride's existence in my opinion. But besides that is where we actually hopped over near Small World to actually get a head start in that area, where my friend actually got a pretzel and some merch for his wife and kid back home, while relaxing a bit in Toontown before it was time to ride again when the parade was being prepared in the meantime. And then after that, we went on a very smooth experience with Small World Holiday with a 3-minute wait time when we boarded our boat near the beautiful lit up facade that is one of the best reasons to come to Disneyland during this time of the holidays. At least a bit more variety to the Small World song instead of continuously hearing it again and again, with some jingle bells added there for the variety most people actually want to ride this attraction. Where at least for someone like me, I actually love it and tolerate it being a relaxing boat ride connecting all the cultures of the world together despite the song just repeating every single time. And during that process, we had enough time to plan for the next attraction, which actually would be heading to the park's most busiest and elaborate ride ever yet, being Rise of the Resistance. Now earlier in the day, we did preview Rise a bit when we were heading over to Smuggler's Run, where the attraction went up to a staggering 90-minute wait, which of course is insane, but also understandable considering what attraction it is, but still yet again incomparable to its other individual Lightning Lane counterpart in DCA, being Radiator Springs Racers. And then speaking about this is where we actually have to talk about those individual Lightning Lanes. Offered away from Genie Plus is where anyone can actually get at any time, where instead of purchasing the system for an entire day, you can actually choose a select attraction for a separate price at any time to actually ride depending on availability, where more newer rides that were introduce will be placed under the system to spread out the wait times, as it would be more crazier than if they were offered under one system like FastPass, and will be continually offered for the ones that are consistently the longest regardless of what happens, like Rise being the more elaborate ride that it is. Where before this point of Genie's actual introduction, Rise of the Resistance used to be offered under these boarding groups when it was first introduced. This is effectively similar to the entire virtual queue system, part of the 4 main ways to actually ride a ride in modern Disney, such as these older videos show. The ones we know Disney World usually offers, but the only one that Disneyland offers for its shows like World of Color, which of course at its time was kind of mixed when it came out because of the fact it was such a limited system that confused many people due to such high demand of a new attraction. Guests were actually required to register for a boarding group on their phone or at an in-park kiosk to actually gain access to the ride, where they were then filled for the day within minutes of the park opening itself, requiring guests to actually arrive at the park at its opening time in order to secure a place in line to go on the ride. And these were actually generally just rolled out throughout the day to be called at a certain time, which was kind of crazy to be honest, just to ride the attraction itself, where you actually have to be on your phone all day just to actually make sure you secure that spot and get notified later on for when you would board, either at the earliest time possible during the park opening or near the park closing. But of course, in the later half of 2021, that was virtually changed as Genie was introduced and they went back to the normal standby system for the attraction, which turned out to be alright compared to Cars, as we see that attraction still gets even busier wait times. But this showed a blatant issue when you force people to use an app to board certain attractions regardless of free or not, making people fear missing out the window or virtually pay to get into a certain area, which on its own is a lot to get into, where I was fortunate enough to actually miss it out due to being the most complex ride that Walt Disney Imagineering had ever designed under such a weird system, now with the lightning lanes added after COVID. Where going back to the individual lightning lanes is another system that also fluctuates, but only in price in this regard, where the only plus about this is the fact that we can redeem another one if we are willing to put up with a bogus price tag, which isn't justifiable at all. We can just keep doing it for how long we want until the park closes or our bank accounts are just virtually dry at that point. And because of that fact, I'm going to show you something very important here when we decide to do just the standby line that only ran about 55 minutes at this point.
So now we've reached the busiest attraction in all of Disneyland, Rise of the Resistance. This one is special because it's under that individual lightning lane list, meaning you can get this ride for about the price of $26. Now this range originally was about $7, but now during different seasons, it goes up to $26, which is about almost as much as what we pay for Genie, which is $30, and also individually per person. Now, we decided to go into the standby line because it's better and it actually moves pretty fast if you think about it. Because if you actually purchase the individual lightning lane, you're just adding another extra almost $30 to the same attraction if you choose to do so. And if you wait in the standby line like everybody else, you still get the same experience as those who ride individual lightning lanes as much as anyone who rides FastPass. So, because Rise of the Resistance is of course the most immersive Disney attraction to date, both combining trackless technology, Star Tours simulator technology, amidst other things that makes it the best Disney experience. Of course, you begin with the pre-show with Ray and other characters like BB-8, and then move on from there when you walk, and then you enter another simulator that actually makes you walk to another set of the attraction. So this is where you have to ask yourself, is it actually worth it to get an individual lightning lane for an attraction like Rise of the Resistance? And the answer is no.
And to be honest with you, I'm actually right, because when we stood in that standby line that was almost an hour of the posted wait time, the line was still able to move continuously throughout the night. My last trip that I went to Disneyland for the Downfall video was around 75 minutes, and that too actually moved despite it being more slower and longer in the front of the queue when we actually first entered. It's just where you have to ask yourself if an experience is actually worth seeing that bad that you need to skip this entire line that just kept moving for me as I was actually talking. Because if you see something that's moving at this rate at that very time, you really don't need to spend $26 per person just for this one attraction unless you really want Disney to go back to their old ways of selling separate tickets, which this is actually doing just that. And I think Disney actually knows this as well, knowing that wait times can be inflated where people will generally be discouraged by such a wait, knowing that not all wait times are created equal for different attractions. Ones that seem longer like Indiana Jones and the other traditional attractions offer that even Peter Pan also entails, where 20 minutes can actually seem like an hour waiting in that line, which doesn't even have lightning lane for that attraction. Because 55 minutes here cannot be the same as 55 minutes somewhere else for a line like Haunted Mansion. It just doesn't make sense, and that moves slower. Because the reality is with this attraction is that it actually comes in parts. It's not only just the vehicle you get into the ride, it also starts at the pre-show I said with Rey and all the others where the actors did return for this ride because of the fact that they were filming Rise of Skywalker at the same time. Where after that fact, you then load onto this transport ship, which is a simulator portion that's very fun that rotates you inside the show building before going on the Star Destroyer with these animatronic stormtroopers before actually being loaded onto the very vehicle. And all of that is a part of the experience of the attraction because they immerse you in the world of the sequel trilogy of Star Wars like a walkthrough at first, which does load plenty of guests at that very portion, hence why it does feel like it's more faster to load because they can actually do that before loading into the attraction. And when you see it, it actually does make it worth the wait by how much care they actually did put into the storyline and the technology that Disney had learned throughout the years. That even with the smaller outdoor queue, you still experience some of that story with this specific base and what it entails to reach to that very point of the attraction. And unless you actually want to ride this for the entire day and have some time to spare to actually do something else, then you really can't justify Disney's expensive price tag disguised as skipping the line, because otherwise, other than that, you'd have to be more content with the entire virtual queue system to board a separate group at a certain time of the day that will get filled up, making you miss out on an entire attraction for that very day. So just don't do it at all. You're just incentivizing Disney to keep justifying increasing profits and revenue in the parks, a division that has been a steady source of income for the company when we saw their film division collapse this entire year and the question of profitability on Disney Plus yet. But besides that, this ride actually remains to be a great attraction and marvel on its own, despite of course being based on a set of films I don't particularly like at all. Loving the fact they combined these screens, the audio animatronics, trackless rides, simulators, and an elevator drop and lift shaft with a walkthrough attraction in between. A fantastic marvel for what it truly is. And after that, we decided to do what Genie wanted us to do the first thing in the morning, which was heading towards Pirates of the Caribbean, which was a 20-minute wait at this time and also moved along fast just like Rise did, but of course a bit more faster due to its faster loading times and the size of the boats. This is just a great example of a ride that does not need Lightning Lane at all, as the queue portion is in fact much more smaller and more outdoors, as you see right here, in order to fit as many people as possible and load onto that very side. Where using Genie will destroy this attraction, limiting people to one side instead of the two we can choose to get up. How it actually remained this way over the years, especially during the huge success of the films that based itself on this very ride, is nothing short of the impressive ride management displayed in this system. I'm also bringing this fact up because not only were we able to actually complete such an attraction after experiencing huge longer thrills earlier compared to following Genie's advice, but mainly because of the lines themselves, as something you would see go the opposite and wrong direction on the Genie Plus system with rides at California Adventure we experienced at the next day. If this ride gets busy as this with plenty waiting to experience it, imagine if you put a new queue designed as a separate virtual queue that others can actually ride at a later time that mixes within the same line at a separate point. Where if you think about it, you're probably picturing chaos, right? Well, it's safe to say that gladly hasn't happened yet over here, and the line moves quickly and we are able to experience the entire dark ride portion. Because after we did this, we decided to head over to the other side of the park from New Orleans back to Tomorrowland, as the wait for Buzz Lightyear was so low and only around 5 minutes. And something the updated Genie wanted to do was earlier in the day, which only clocked in at around 5 minutes at 7:30. At the same time, we also captured the first showing of the Castle Wintertime Enchantment, which is just so beautiful and another reason to go to Disney during Christmas time before heading over to the next ride. Now, I did originally say that the wait on Buzz was 5 minutes at the time, but there was a big bulge waiting on the standby queue, so we just decided it was best to redeem our Lightning Lane for this attraction, which was exactly the same time to return as we just looked up right there. Which in fact is the best part of the system, where the return time is exactly the same time as the actual time right there, depending on how big the queue is, getting an easy quick line right inside. Which of course is the reason why the line was longer on left, because of course the Lightning Lane was there too, adding more weight to the guest. Now of course, as you see, I decided to record this ride too so that you would experience it, where I had to do things left-handed to shoot in the hidden places to attempt to try to get the bonus points and the best I could, where the fact that remained that despite me telling my friend to turn the stick that's in the middle of the actual vehicle, he didn't actually do that, so I actually had to elbow it in order for me to get more target affiliates, which frustrated me, and the fact that none of the targets I wanted to hit were registering at all that I actually didn't see until the very end, where I saw I lost, which I blamed it on filming the entire attraction, which I vowed after that point not to do for the other rides in DCA, as I would punish my friend and everyone else in the ride vehicles because I am just that good. But besides that, when you look at this attraction, you kind of really see it doesn't actually need Lightning Lane at all. Yes, it sometimes does get busy because of the fact it's an interactive shooter, but then again, this other half of the IP that the park already has outdated itself when DCA has already two similar types of attractions that allow for more freedom of movement to shoot such targets. Where what I'm saying here in this part is the fact that Tomorrowland needs to go back to its roots of making attractions based upon the stylized optimism of the 50s and 60s future, with original rides like Space Mountain to make it a better experience that I actually know Disney is capable of doing, but they just don't do it. So after we completed this ride, we decided to take a little break before fireworks and eat some dinner, which I actually attempted to film this part of the video to go over these selections we just did for the day before we actually decided to continue the night after fireworks, where including the ones we went on standby, we actually rode about 10 of the 12 attractions offered under Genie Plus at Disneyland. The other two that we didn't do is Autopia and Roger Rabbit, which weren't as quite interesting for us to do, so we unfortunately skipped those for the bigger favorites. The sad thing about this part was the fact that fireworks this night was actually cancelled due to higher wind elevations, but the good thing that actually resulted in the meantime was the fact that we were able to book a Lightning Lane for rides we already did earlier in the day as a comparison, like the Matterhorn during this hour. And as another bonus during that same time frame, because we already redeemed one for that hour was up, and the fact that Big Thunder was closed earlier that we actually redeemed another, we managed to book Big Thunder again during that same time frame because it was open yet again, which made it a huge early Christmas gift, as we could actually make it to one attraction within the same time as the next, hence why you see these overlapping times on the screen, going to Thunder first, then going to Matterhorn. Which, despite Genie actually recommending that that's not a good idea because it's an overlapping plan, it doesn't matter because we can actually ride it and actually have more time to spare to actually do another one, where coincidentally, we were actually placed in the same area as the morning in the same rows when we first started to ride these very rides. A very poetic end to this day using Genie, by sort of following its advice to get on these rides later at night and not following it earlier in the day. And that was totally fun, as it did serve as a useful tool to just get on one attraction to the next for that very hour, where most people would still be actually getting their last ride before they leave for the very night. Using it that way, you could probably see that this is actually a very complementary system that actually contributes to a very ease of riding what you want. And after we actually rode all these attractions, we decided to go back towards the busiest dark ride in all of Disneyland, with only a standby line being of course Peter Pan, the most brutal wait time in the entire park, where there's nothing you can actually do about it except to accept that and appreciate the fact that it is an excellent dark ride, which of course is a great way to end the night before closing time of that very day, thus ending us with a semi-successful day, about 13 rides, which 10 of which were on Lightning Lane. We didn't do all of them, but we got the most important ones either in the standby early on and double riding them later on with Genie Plus, and of course one attraction that had individual Lightning Lane without using that lane at all for the cost of free, which of course begins the new cycle with Disney California Adventure the very next day. So now we have our second and final day of Genie Plus with Disney California Adventure. Now, Disney California Adventure is of course the younger park that has been going through various phases of development because of how terrible it was to start with, and slowly recovering ever since. Where today, it is now in its third era with its IP-led theming of Pixar and Marvel attractions, not knowing what the hell it even wants to be as a theme park other than being the additional bonus offering to Disneyland, which is all it has ever been. Being as old as myself, but still slightly older. And because of that, they offer less attractions due to it being still a little bit smaller and a little bit new under the new Genie Plus system. About 8 rides only offered under Lightning Lane, which we can easily complete during this entire day. And as you see by us entering the park, and what everyone else is planning, the first attraction of the day is to try and rope drop the highly anticipated Radiator Springs Racers, DCA's biggest attraction. Where of course, you have to ride it the earliest, otherwise you would get stuck in a wait time well over 100 minutes. The most brutal ride wait time to date in the two parks. But for this, I gave into the system and decided it was actually time to actually try out the individual Lightning Lane for this one to see how it is. Which wasn't as bad, as it costed much less at around $16 per person at that time, which is kind of a better deal to ride for something that does get quite as busy in the day compared to say Rise, which is constantly way too much money for something like that. But understandable because it is a new and different experience. So as you can see, I decided to purchase it, which kind of works the same way you would go about purchasing a normal Genie Plus day at the park, but just now for a separate attraction that you can redeem at any time. The unfortunate thing, however, was the fact that a few minutes later, it updated to actually warn us that the ride was actually going to be down for the first hour of the park's opening. It usually had been like that for the past few days of that week, so we kind of anticipated it, but because we purchased that system, it allowed us to redeem at a later time whenever that was, starting at 8 AM because it was a paid system. Which was kind of fun and sad to see people rope drop that attraction and head to that very area where cast members actually told them that the ride will be closed for this hour, which kind of ruins the first plans when people go to different areas of the park. Evidently, at the same time, we checked our Genie Day for what we wanted to do and what we put into DCA, where it generally actually worked this time around, where the system is just so random to what it wants to do depending on your options that it forgets what could be done if something is available, making us head over to Incredicoaster as our first option, which is exactly what we did and wanted to do after Radiator Springs was closed. So in that regard, it wasn't completely useless in that part because it actually did something we want in the general area of where we wanted to go for the day. Like I said, the original plan was for Radiator Springs first, but because it was down, it was just better to go towards Pixar Pier to get this section of attractions done, which we actually set out to do with the fastest rides the resort had to offer. And getting onto the ride was just virtually a walk-on at that point, with people still heading over. I mean, we weren't the actual first in, but it was still very efficient for the day that you will notice because it actually wasn't busy at all compared to tomorrow when it actually did fill up. The next attraction after that was of course Toy Story Mania, the second busiest ride in the entire park that fills up so fast that we just had to get in right now, where it just clocked in at about 15 minutes, where when we actually went to actually get in the line, it actually ticked up to 30 just as more people actually got behind us, where thankfully for us, it actually did last about 15 minutes for us inside before we actually got on. Other than the fact that the ride was experiencing issues at the time at first, where after we actually finished riding it, it actually closed for a time, so we were fortunate to get lucky with this, otherwise we would have to save it for a lightning lane later in the day. And like I said earlier about what I got upset at Buzz Lightyear, I did in fact win on this attraction because I actually didn't record it at all, where in fact I was actually the highest score in the entire vehicle because of the fact I am just that good when it actually comes to these games. Don't even try and test me on this because you will get beaten. And after this attraction, we were able to complete more rides that normally aren't offered under Genie Plus, like the Pixar Pal Around with the swinging version and the Silly Symphony Swings, easier rides with lower wait times at this hour that should be completed in this grand trip of DCA. At the same time, we managed to book our first Genie Plus lightning lane, which of course was Guardians of the Galaxy, which does tend to get more busy as you will see, where we actually have to wait a little bit longer even in the lightning lane. And at this point, we decided to head to a fairly convenient Genie Plus attraction that was just added to the system about a few months ago before this recording, known as the Little Mermaid. Now this is something very important to mention because of how short the list of rides are offered at DCA, where they now offer a ride that doesn't get as quite as busy that Disney needs in order to justify you spending that price tag of Genie Plus depending on the day. Something I want to talk about is wrong and a gross misuse of that very value.
This is an example of a misuse of the Genie system by adding attractions like the Little Mermaid here, where as you can see, this used to be the former front entrance of the attraction that used to enter with standby. And this attraction, even during its opening day, only had about a maximum of 35 minutes, and the line usually would move fast. And it does move fast very quick right this second. But now, as you can see, the entrance has moved over to the back, where you have the Genie Plus Lightning Lane entrance and the normal standby entrance that makes you enter that area of the queue.
So in order for guests to experience the ride, they have to make their way all the way over here and then ride the ride from there. And the reason I said this is a gross misuse of Genie is the fact that I also said this doesn't actually get a very long wait time at all during the day because it is an Omnimover system based upon a movie people already know at this point. Where for its time with what it added to DCA was a fairly neat deal, but it really doesn't add much value for something you already know that fits the normal dark ride in areas like Fantasyland, where it also opened at Disney World at the Magic Kingdom in that very section. Something like this that constantly moves and is within a park filled with bigger thrills just isn't really designed to fit a 60-minute wait time, where adding Genie only creates more confusion to such attractions and inflates the wait times of the standby to an amount that it just doesn't need at all, and for the convenience of other guests. Now thankfully at this point, Genie has not affected the Little Mermaid as much as I thought, because they did something similar to another attraction in Monsters Monsters Inc. that we will see a bit later that actually made the line much longer than it needed to be than if it wasn't actually added at all. It is just here in the interest of justifying how much you are actually paying into the Genie system and what Disney needs to actually have people spend on it. I mean, it would make sense if the price for this was like $10 for like Max Pass for the whole entire system, but for this time, it really just doesn't need to do that at all and makes things much more worse and confusing, adding lines that don't need to be added unless you were actually planning a brand new experience that many people just have to see. Rides like this are just more comparable to the typical Fantasyland dark rides that don't really need to get busy at all or added with another line that are for the whole family, and again under the OmniMover system that loads guests constantly with no stop. It just represents a poor management decision done by Disneyland Resort and the overall system put in place by the Walt Disney Company itself and the park division that they have. But with that said and out of the way, we are able to complete this ride with ease and move back towards our first goal with the individual Lightning Lane and Radiator Springs racers that opened up once again. Where again, we enter as we normally would with any Lightning Lane attraction, but just with the new added bonus that this line is much more faster, even more so than the single rider as most people would actually do for free because of the fact we did pay for it. This is also compared to the days of FastPass that was actually offered for this attraction that was also free as well, where people even lined up at Rope Drop just to rope drop the FastPass, proving how busy it really was and how popular it was, and how Disney managed to solve that problem by just charging extra instead of the entire complimentary system that was free that we all miss. But yeah, generally with that pass we actually paid for, we were able to get onto this ride within only 3 minutes, which was pretty much smooth where we got to sit in the front. And like always, this attraction is a truly gorgeous spectacle looking above the Cadillac Range and all the rock work that was designed only by human hands that seems so real that nature could have done it itself. Where of course, we all did the same thing and raced to the finish, which we sadly actually lost, but still enjoyed ourselves regardless. And with that portion out of the way with the most important ride done, with time to spare before we get onto Guardians, we just decided to tour Avengers Campus and get some breakfast before doing some quick work behind Hollywoodland and Animation Academy.
So this is a part where you have to relax and unwind, as the wait between going to your next Lightning Lane could be long and we had to do something else. Like here when I recorded here in the Sorcerer's Workshop at Animation Academy, which is probably one of the best places in all of DCA, and one I hope Disney does not take down, because as of this recording, they took down another area known as the Beast Library where you can actually choose and interact as your favorite Disney character. I mean, like a book with Lumiere in that regard, and replaced with this thing, I forget what was called, but not very important to Disney at this point. But for now, we should be content with the Sorcerer's Workshop as it is now, where you can create little animated drawings that you can put in this Zoetrope or whatever it was called again, I forget. I'm not an animator, sorry about that, even though I advocate for that and such. I just love animation as a whole for what it brings. But it's just very fun to actually take a look and see and wind down to see the other hidden parts that Disney has to offer other than this or that, if you know what I mean.
And so, by 11:30, we headed over towards the Guardians of the Galaxy to test out this Lightning Lane attraction, where like I said earlier, it was probably a bit longer in this attraction out of every single lane we actually tried out. Because if you knew how this ride worked and the Tower of Terror that preceded it beforehand, it consists of different elevator shafts that load a vehicle at a time where it rises and falls, where because of that, you have to wait a little bit longer for that elevator lift to actually load, where you can easily enter towards the first pre-show in this part of Lightning Lane, but then again have to wait for the whole ride vehicle that follows soon after. Still probably the most fun ride as a result, where the force of it going up and down feels more intense than your typical coaster that actually goes down a hill. Not that I ever screamed on any thrill ride in my life, as you can see I recorded this picture of took of me when I was feigning that I was sleeping, where it just is more fun that you can pretend to look dead inside when you can ride attractions, especially if that attraction actually replaced a ride that was more popular and never actually needed to change to an outdated movie that characters are either dead now or just grown up in the changing Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, I just really do miss riding the Tower of Terror here at DCA, and now have to contend with the fact that Avengers Campus exists, and it's not a very good land design with what they have now. I mean, yes, it will get more rides like the anticipated Avengers one coming in the next few years, but still with what they have actually replaced in Bugs Land that was more immersive that had more rides in such a smaller area, does seem like an actual downgrade in order to fit more shops and meet and greets and places to eat. And at that time in the park, we decided to resettle and place ourselves to the next Lightning Lane that was going to be more than 2 hours away, regardless in a ride known as Spider-Man's Web Slingers. The other ride similar to Toy Story Mania with terrible graphics but an actually fun attraction where you can use your hands to sling web shooters. Where before this, we managed to get on Incredicoaster again by using another method that I'll actually mention a little bit later after closing on this part of the day at the park and going straight towards Web Slingers to complete this part of the day before heading back. And while going to Web Slingers, and because of the time it actually took for the return time for Lightning Lane, we just decided to ride Goofy Sky School in between the wait, which that was actually about 35 minutes to wait, so we tried to test that part out, where this ride has the load area actually move constantly throughout for the next 4 people, but sadly it's still slow because of the fact that Lightning Lane is also used for other people in this attraction, where all guests have to load in this one area since there is only one for this Wild Mouse coaster, and then mix in the standby next as to not create much confusion or back up in that part of the system. But having that system there is a perfect example about how wait times can actually get longer for certain rides depending on how they work, regardless of how efficient the loading may seem. And like I said, it was 35 minutes to be exact, where we finally went to Web Slingers soon after just in time. And this time, it was only about 5 minutes to wait because of the fact we have to enter the pre-show building first, as that is the first part before entering the entire system. The previous trip I did was just waiting in the standby line, which is mainly just the outside queue portion you see a little bit here, where the inside features the show done by Tom Holland before you actually get onto the ride and start actually riding the ride and shooting the Web Slingers. A ride that is just purely simple by just flinging your hands the way you normally would if you're pretending to be Spider-Man growing up flinging those webs. And believe me when I say this attraction will make you super exhausted because it really does when you have to constantly fling your arms left and right to hit the targets faster than your other counterparts in the vehicle. And you don't have to worry about this again because once again in this attraction, I was still the highest scorer in the vehicle because I was just that awesome. Where after this, we then took a short break outside because they were doing the daily Spider-Man show where they had this cool animatronic that launches sky high towards the 2 show buildings. An impressive feat regardless if you've seen those fail videos online, which really accounts for everything while having a real performer at the same time to greet the guests later on. Where sometimes when you slow down away from actually riding the rides and worrying less about those lines is where the real experience of Disney actually comes. The people who actually make it and the entertainment that involves everyone else that makes it better than anything else. This was then when we took another break heading to the hotel before going out again, booking Soarin' Around the World as our next attraction. Well, that and I also kind of forget that we rode Grizzly River Run in the same time, which I did not record because that was very wet, where because of the weather most were wanting to heat. The ride was only a 5-minute wait time, which was very great except for the fact that I was the one who got wet the most and really had to head back to the hotel anyway because of that and my shoes that were all filled with water. But later on, we did return to the park and head towards Soarin'. And this is where we ran into another roadblock before we went on the ride. I mean, thankfully in this, it happened before we actually redeemed the Lightning Lane to board, but I'm sure Paz Alden can actually explain this part quite well for you as you're about to see.
Sometimes other issues can actually plague other attractions with Lightning Lane involved, such as what you see behind me with Soarin'. This long line you see outside me is due to the fact that one theater is only working at a time, where Soarin' actually consists of 2 main theaters to actually work, and if one's down, that means the lines will be longer, regardless of standby or Lightning Lane, which of course Lightning Lane or the whole entire Genie Plus system only seeks to create more lines as a result, despite you paying for the system for a faster experience.
So as I just said for several attractions like Soarin', lines will still be long depending on what actually happens to one area, where they do usually have 2 theaters as this is just a simulator attraction with a movie playing about flying around the globe, where when one is actually let down, it usually extends the wait on both sides regardless, where because of that, it just becomes the least enjoyable queue for that reason because of that fact, and they have to continue to load and unload guests in that regard. The one at Disney World tries to mitigate this by adding a 3rd theater, which actually helps them in this case, but because of the room here in DCA, that kind of is impossible to really add, so we just have to deal with this fact regardless of what happens to the guests that conversely either wait here or wait there. As a recommendation, if you feel like you want to actually ride this ride, then do a rope drop and don't do it later in the day when things can actually break down for a time. It just adds more headache throughout, even though we kinda made it in within the time of 5 minutes as well. And in that same time, we booked our very last Lightning Lane for the day as we rode every single attraction offered under this system, which was of course Monsters Inc. And this is the part where I wanted to show you the most because of what it actually does to the ride. Because again, this ride was actually about the same wait time as Goofy Sky School at this hour of the park at around around 35 minutes, which of course you actually might say isn't that bad, but then shouldn't actually exist because of Genie Plus itself, where before this even existed, just like The Little Mermaid beforehand, the wait time for this was about a max of 15 minutes because of the fact it was just another simple dark ride, where nowadays you see this entire line of people waiting to get in because it's now become so damn popular under the new system, where people now make the choice to actually book this ride so that they can get the same value of riding every single attraction, which makes people think that this ride is a must ride when it actually isn't. I mean, I do enjoy this dark ride aspect of it of Mike and Sully, but it's just another movie based ride in a land that doesn't know what the hell it actually wants to be, and it's made worse by the fact that some major parts are reskins from Disney's worst ride ever that all of us know as the infamous Superstar Limo. Like literally, if you go back in the past, you can see the comparisons and the bones of the older ride that was heavily panned by everyone, including questioned by the Imagineers who normally don't create this kind of ride at all. Just a piece of shit, to be honest with you, where it just simply did not work. Where a lot more can be done with its area and ride instead of this. I mean, it's fun and it has a lot of nice work given to it, but the area just needs more life to it that isn't being justified at all with this Genie system. Instead of doing that, they just want to promote this as another way to make money. But of course, with that part out of the way, we headed over to one final ride on the Incredicoaster again with another lower wait time in the standby queue before eating some dinner with another low wait time where we actually redeemed the lightning lane for that and headed over to the final piece of the night at DCA, which was World of Color Season of Light, which we also do so by doing the virtual queue I said earlier, compared to what I remember way back when we had to do dining packages to get a reserved area to sit in, where we now do it simply by doing our phones and reserving a spot in the line, where we then get called to our viewing area at a certain time, which is kinda neat and great that this is the only thing that uses virtual queue for the entire Disneyland Resort until another attraction gets opened up that needs that, or just lightning lane that justifies itself individually. But finally, we ended DCA with a beautiful night with a beautiful show of World of Color that regrettably began with the movie that has become the bane of my existence and the one you saw me wearing a bit earlier in Wish, because they were still promoting Wish at the time to get anyone to still watch it in theaters if they even cared, without even saving what poor excuse of a story that movie was before actually getting to the real show being Season of Light with the beautiful Christmas music and colors to brighten up the night. It generally is one of the best things DCA has done to its redesign in the park that has become a great mainstay when the fireworks at Disneyland has become so unreliable with heavy winds each night, all because of the fact that we are in a populated area such as Anaheim, California. And yes, you guys are just welcome for the fact that we did get the best and wettest seat in the house near the bay itself. I mean, you actually don't get that wet, but you still get mist sprayed at you pretty heavily in this portion. Not enough to actually wet in your clothes at least. And with that part, we decided to end the night by heading back towards Disneyland to complete the other dark rides there, or whatever we wanted to do at that day in the park as we completed everything. This is going to be a fairly short section because of the fact we rushed over between parts to at least catch the fireworks on that night, which was held under the B mode showing, before actually doing our last attractions like Alice in Wonderland as our first major ride that would be the one that would close during rainy days because it runs outside, where it shut down just before we actually got on the attraction but got back up about 10 minutes later, so we were able to do that, doing rides that didn't need Genie or have any wait times regarding that. And of course, after that, we worked our way towards the rest of the Fantasyland rides that we wanted to do, like Mr. Toad's and so forth, which you're going to see a bit later on the Genie system for us to do at 8 AM at the last day of the park, which honestly is the worst thing you could ever do to follow because the other dark rides that aren't named Peter Pan generally move along quickly throughout the entire day and you do not need to worry about that line because they're super efficient to load and unload. So we were able to do that all between the 10 to 11 PM hour just before heading to one last ride for the night, which of course was Big Thunder Mountain yet again, which at the 11th hour of the park was virtually a walk-on, proving depending on how long you stay, you can ride rides even at what is described as the busiest time of the year close to Christmas with no wait time. And it was enough where we could have actually rode it twice since it was the same walk-on before heading back to finish the night, where it was an overall alright way to end the day from DCA to add more attractions to what we just did. We could have stayed a bit longer to do more of the Animation Academy drawings till park closing of that park, but there was just more stuff to do at Disneyland for the recordings I got you. The point where you just really need to stop using Genie at this moment in time because it's not really necessary to follow the more you get tired and the more closer you get to the closing of the park yet again. So with that, we closed day 2 with DCA riding every single attraction they offered under the Genie system in terms of both good or bad. Like, it's great you can accomplish all of that, but that's because some of these rides don't even need to exist on the Genie Plus system, and the fact that some rides that we actually reserve can be more further out there compared to say Disneyland yesterday when we were able to cheat the system to ride rides back to back, where we were just less fortunate here, but still being able to test out some of those those rides without redeeming it on standby, which isn't recommended considering you want to use the system to its max potential, but also necessary to cover what you need to cover as the free portion yet again that isn't fair to you or me at all, or even the paid portion for that plan that you need involved for any Disney park. Like honestly, why would I even waste time watching Turtle Talk with Crush when I could have redeemed an attraction like Soarin' Around the World that's more longer to wait in? Again, I never added that to do for the entire day because there were just better experiences than going following Genie, than going to talk to a guy playing a CGI turtle for little kids, or even just going to the bakery tour for that matter. Because unless I was just a new tourist who spent their first time at Disney, this is probably going to be the most worthless use of my time. This then leads us to our last day at Disneyland, which is more free and covered more ground to take a look at what my Genie Day has planned for the last day at the park. And most of these rides covered here are still not worth it if I wanted to ride the bigger thrills, yet again knowing they will get more busier and closer and closer to the holidays after all. Whereas you could see, this was in fact the rainiest day of the entire week, so things were going to be shut down on the outside and others like Space Mountain would become more clogged up as people wanted to stay dry. So in this part, I did the same rope drop strategy just to test it out at the very front after the early entry guests went in to head again towards Space Mountain because my friend was still in the hotel at this time. Riding in again at about 3 minutes count the entire time it took to walk to the station, because that is a long walk. This then allowed me to resettle and check my Genie Day portion to see what it offered, where of course the very first suggestion it had was in fact the worst, going to Mr. Toad's Wow Ride at the first thing at 8 AM in the morning before going to Big Thunder right after. A fact where the ride was actually closed for the first hour of the park because of the fact of the rain, and how I said earlier that Mr. Toad's doesn't really need to get on because it doesn't actually get any busy during any hour of the day that you can actually ride regardless, which will not benefit you at all if you choose to do so at the first thing in the morning, unless you were part of the early entry guests and you wanted to get all of Fantasyland done, which is totally actually a breeze throughout. Then you really shouldn't be heading all the way towards Mr. Toad's just to ride that when you could have done the second option if it was open. Granted, I appreciate that we have more thrills involved in this day of My Genie than involves Star Tours and Space Mountain, but then again, just before that, you have to go to the Tiki Room before going over there, and then to Snow White after, and then to Casey Jr. for some reason, before heading towards Tom Sawyer Island, which was also closed due to the rain that day, before going to Rise of the Resistance, then somehow after that, heading to Dumbo for some reason that I never actually put in at all, and then of course to the Matterhorn, and then of course to the submarines, before going all the way back to cross over to Indiana Jones and Jungle Cruise just to get back to Fantasyland yet again to do the thing we just did the first night, which was Peter Pan and King Arthur's Carousel. Everything you just saw on that list does not sound like a great plan at all, where it just feels and comes from the perspective of a newbie who spent their first time at Disneyland and didn't know where to go, where of course it was probably designed for those people in mind the more you actually think about, and what I just said earlier in the video, that was only made for dispersing guests to lower weight attractions during the day for crowd control and merchandise, because there is no other reason you should be taking these longer walks from one big attraction to the small one in Fantasyland unless you are taking a break to get a snack or whatever merch you wanted. That is the other reason why they want to limit the amount you are able to put as your top picks, because they want you to do this very specific thing that you probably didn't actually want to do at all, where only a fool could say that Mr. Toad's is the first ride that they would do at 8 AM when the park opens. It just doesn't make sense for you to do so. But then again, that wasn't the worst thing about the system when I chose not to do Genie Plus for this very day.
So for today, the last day I'm here at Disneyland, I logged into the system yet again and found out that the cost of Genie was raised by $5 more at a total of $35 per person, which is something I did not want to do due to the fact that the holidays are starting at this very moment, about 5 days before Christmas. This is something I saw before the week of Thanksgiving when I was checking the system, and now it's here again because due to availability of such attractions are limited, and Lightning Lane reservations can only be given out at a certain time for how long it's actually been given. And so today I just wanted to experiment what attractions I could do on my own without Genie or Genie Plus for that matter.
This was just one of those examples of how the system can fluctuate constantly throughout the year from its very original price tag of only $20 and then updates in the holidays to $35, where it just makes sense for them to do so considering both Christmas and New Year celebration and the preparation of newer guests coming to celebrate whenever they are coming here, which overall actually still doesn't help anybody in this case except Disney, because you are losing more money on these days, which are done for those willing to come at this time knowing that there is more potential for more guests. guests who come in who want to avoid the holiday rush. But as we all know, this still kinda makes it unfair for some attractions offered because of that choke point that all guests need to converge combining Standby and Lightning Lane. So because of that, and because I'm the one who had to buy Genie for these entire days, it was just easier for us to experience Disney the standard way that most people would go doing so, going to ride sweet rides like the Storybook Canals and Casey Jr. as our last major Fantasyland attractions to fill the day before we actually had to spend time in the afternoon at Olga's Cantina in the later half of the day for dinner. And because the rain constantly stopped and started throughout the entire day, some rides had to close and reopen over the course of time, which was actually very convenient, where we actually rode the Matterhorn again in a short 3-minute wait because it literally just opened in that area at that time. And then of course after that, we made our way to ride the Submarine Voyage, as that was another ride that Lightning Lane is not offered under, where everyone gets to wait in the same time, which makes sense because they're slow big subs that actually carry a lot of people. Remembering for the most part that this is the ride that was under the same track that was present since its opening in 1959 when it was known as the Submarine Voyage that Walt Disney opened alongside the Matterhorn and the monorail. Where if we consider that history, then sometimes we should just altogether consider going back to the simpler times where everyone had the fair shot to ride a ride in the standby line. I mean, yeah, that time did have the separate ticket system that you had to get into rides, which Lightning Lane is actually acting similar to nowadays, but such systems Disney put in like FastPass that started this mess in the first place just weren't there at the very least, and everyone still had that fair shot of that chance. Everyone could just get on and get off, and that's how most experiences should be in that park. Whether it be easy or convenient, if we remember our previous attractions in Monsters Inc. and The Little Mermaid that didn't need that at all, and most people can get on within a short amount of time. But overall, this part is just very lax, riding rides we did before in the standby one, or ones we didn't actually do from before, completing what we could before the rain actually started to heavily pour during the night and then stopped. It's unfortunate that that had to happen, but at least I had a lot of time to sit down and talk about the pros and cons of these systems, watching attractions that are the hallmark of the Disney experience like the Tiki Room as well, and then talking about what we experienced that totaled me about $120 for just 2 days alone just to use Genie Plus for 2 people, compared to before when COVID actually existed for about $120 less because of the fact it was free. Free compared to like other companies like Universal had already implemented paid systems where it was only a matter of time before Disney would follow soon after. A sad thing where Disney actually offered a lot of value for what they had as theme parks, but now not do so because they need to justify their new profits.
So as you can see, the uses of the Genie system, depending on how you can do it, can actually make your time at the park more enjoyable. At of course the cost of spending an extra $30 or more depending on the season. The same thing as the old FastPass, but a little bit better for the fact that it's available when you start your day. But that's also the bad thing because you have to pay every single day in order to use that system. Like, why would you go to Mr. Toad's at 8 AM in the morning? That doesn't even make any remote sense. At the same time, you could actually go to attractions like Space Mountain or the Matterhorn or Big Thunder that opens at the same time that you know is going to get busy, rather than going to Mr. Toad's that generally has a low wait time throughout the entire day, from opening to closing of the entire park. It just doesn't make sense to why you would follow Genie and its recommendations when it's exactly doing the opposite of what you want to do, right? But of course, it's Disney, and Disney thinks you're wrong because Disney wants your money, and your money is the most valuable thing overall with doing things like this system, right? Like seriously, what is the best choice that you would make in this decision? Do you go to this attraction and do this attraction, or do you do the exact opposite and follow what Genie does? I mean, it can be useful if you use it right, as demonstrated right here, but the truth is, it's not very that useful at all when you can actually ride such attractions early on in the morning, get things done as quickly as possible, especially with what we've seen in this entire experiment. So yes, what we have seen is an effective use of Genie and not the most effective use of Genie. But overall, there are plenty of ways that you could experience the entire park without such systems, and how such systems can actually damage such ride attractions as you've seen with The Little Mermaid and Monsters Inc. How it's unnecessary to add things to systems that move quickly throughout the day because it's designed to do just that. Like when you actually think about it, and it's actually very painful to actually think about it, Disney can do more and actually spend more to actually make lines more convenient, such as actually fixing things like Tomorrowland. You know, attractions that used to exist like the People Mover and the actual Skyway that transported people through such an efficient system. But sadly, as you see the state of Tomorrowland, that no longer is the case, isn't it?
And you know I'm right if you had been a Disney fan, looking at those videos of the past years of Disneyland when they had such systems in place. An easily solvable problem that Disney has been avoiding for so long, where new OSHA laws have been put in place and other delays that they promised over the years to bring back such an attraction. Because if you actually think about it, rides like the People Mover are actually meant to solve the problems of lines in a way and the look of how transportation would have actually been in the future. A grand circle tour of Tomorrowland where it took you through every ride like a preview or demo that you might want to try later, and just a relaxing sit-down tour that everyone of all ages could actually take. The best part of it was the fact it was almost a guaranteed walk-on that kept moving because of the fact its name was the People Mover, where I sadly never got to experience at all in my life, where it closed down in the mid-90s for another thrill ride that got shut down within 3 years, where the ride has somehow been gone longer than it has been operating at this point in time, except for the fact that you can still see the track. Like with all of these resources that they have, Disney never goes for the options that are more beneficial to the guests to repeat and actually come back to the resort, instead making things like Genie charge you to get into more rides quicker and more convenient. I mean, it doesn't lessen the impact and experience of such rides as I'm still able to enjoy all of them, but it's just an extra charge to use something that used to be free regardless of what actually happened to Disney, knowing that this system was implemented in the Chapek era but still continued under Iger, where he did approve most of these decisions beforehand when we know he is the notable man who brought all of these properties in that are failing left and right, a legacy he himself carried where people thought that Genie might have been reworked or removed but hasn't at all here at the tail end of 2023 when he had been back in charge for about a year at this point in time. I just can't find a need to justify any of these decisions right now besides that one reason where all of their properties are just failing right now because of how they themselves have damaged their own brand to fall back on something safe but ending up in total failure and then inundating us with mediocre shows that fail to capture what those properties once stood for.
I mean, despite all this, there's also major setbacks that come with the system, like what if the Wi-Fi or internet goes down? There is a possibility of that, or the app actually breaking, as demonstrated by its opening day, as the videos you will see right here.
Because if we were to take a look at the earlier days of Genie, we can see that it did have problems as shown by the channel Fresh Baked, who usually attends Disney frequently to keep people updated during the year as to when most people would want to go. I mean, this is natural of any first day launch, but it kind of also does put into perspective our reliance on our phones that could go up and down where the system can act wonky like it never actually registered that he actually bought Genie Plus here. It is part of that simple fact of using data that can go offline at any point if you're in the park, that areas that cannot get the service we need to actually make it work.
It showed it for a second. It showed my 840 to 940, and now it's gone. And when I clicked on the 840 to 940, it acted as if I didn't buy one, as if I didn't have one, and it offered me to buy one. This is not magical. It shouldn't be this difficult. I mean, I know it's opening day and everything, but still, I'm wasting time. Sitting here, this is supposed to save me time.
And that's a fact that still remains for at least the Genie portion of the system that still is free, where it is supposed to save you time, but it doesn't actually when it goes into more of the same of how certain thresholds of certain rides don't actually make a difference on any attraction, about the point where both lines actually converge and you're just in the same standby, and how during the same time in another video, he tried using the My Genie Day, where the results are virtually the same as it is today, putting things you never actually wanted to put in first, starting with Mr. Toad, and then later on going the day to great moments with Mr. Lincoln, and so on, instead of other major classics that most would actually expect like the monorail and so forth, never wanting to put something that a typical guest might actually plan a day with. Where we see he also included the fact it wanted him to do an enchant extra to build a droid back in Galaxy's Edge for the price of about $99, really showcasing you the true purpose of the system on day one alone, never wanting to be convenient for anybody except for who was in charge of Disney at that time. There is just no way that they could ever justify selling this to anyone that this was an actual good idea, other than the fact that the old FastPass system was just transferred here for a higher cost, which we can see they have been very effective at doing in order to make things much more better in terms of how lines and virtual queues are dispersed and worked throughout the day. Well, at least that's the only thing I could really think of when it comes to this crap, because nothing about it actually makes anything meaningful or worthwhile unless they were planning to use that money for something better, like I mentioned earlier, in attractions, adding more rides to Disneyland, or anything else to add more kinetic energy or stuff in between that they have become so lethargic at actually doing anymore.
So what are the other alternatives that you can do instead of actually paying $30 or $35 to subscribe into the Genie system? Well, the free option, that's the fastest, would of course be single rider. And as you guessed by what it actually says, means that only one person can ride in that lane.
For certain attractions, Disney offers guests the chance to actually ride alone for a faster experience within these designated areas, which are virtually the normal exits of such rides or wheelchair accessible areas that they use to provide you with such experience known as single rider. That, and they do have separate lines for newer attractions that they added for those single riders, where most times guests can actually get a pass from a cast member at a select area to board the ride, as you can see me doing right here for the Incredicoaster at first with my friend, where we got lucky enough to actually ride together in the same area that we did last time, where fate has just deemed us so to ride in certain rows for certain attractions at that very time. Where once you have your pass, you take that to this elevator to board this separate area and then actually wait to ride till they get to the next stop. Where you have to keep in mind, you still have to wait for normal guests who actually ride with their party, where it's not an absolute guarantee that you will be able to board much faster, as they need to get that part done before boarding you next. Where the Incredicoaster actually took about 9 minutes before we actually boarded, as recorded by my friend right here. Still fast enough to board for such a ride that had a 40-minute wait time at that part of the day, but also showed you that it still isn't a guarantee to automatically board despite the shorter queue. But later in the trip, I did this again for Space Mountain by myself, where this time it only took about a minute to fully board after I made my way towards the exit queue and followed the signs, where not many people would actually know or even care to get on, as it is in the underground exit area where most people actually get off. Sometimes it starts above near the rest of the guests to actually get into the queue, or just wherever the lightning lane would normally be offered, but most times they just move it here depending on how busy it could truly be, where I was just truly lucky to have an automatic boarding with this, where other rides like the Matterhorn in the day could be more longer and more different. But overall, this was still a free way to board rides much more quicker than the lightning lane ever could to provide you with that extra $30. But remember, something like this is only worth it if you want to ride by yourself or with another person if they actually put you in that lane. If you want to ride with someone, like getting lucky with what we did on the Incredicoaster, then you're most likely stuck waiting in the standby if you want to do just that. And sadly, that is the only other option you have when it comes to it, due to the fact that virtual queue is only offered sparsely for select experiences like the World of Color here at Disneyland. That is the brief overview of how Genie works for a select few days at Disney, managing to ride 18 out of the 20 attractions offered under the system and done the day of, with the last one dedicated to slow walking and seeing what the regular My Genie recommendations tell you to do that is actually the opposite of what you want to do. But when you look at it from a slowed down perspective, this was not the best use of our time at all. Worried about how to use our phone to book the next lane to do something else and then doing the next fastest thing that is a part of our schedule. Just something you don't want to do when you realize one huge part that actually makes Disney, where that comes from the fact that it is the place itself. If you looked at all of what I filmed and took in every site with Main Street towards Sleeping Beauty Castle, you instead realize the value of space and what it actually plays into the journey of how people enjoy interacting with each other in something different from our own normal lives, and what makes Disneyland Disneyland. And when you think of that, then you truly see the value of what Disneyland is overall, despite the short definition of what a theme park is or amusement park that you normally would think of, where things like Genie just truly ruin that experience for what it should be. You shouldn't actually be focused or worried about the lines at all, because that is a part of the journey you take with all the sights and sounds that is around you, where there is just so much more that you could be doing, where some of the fun is actually discovering the hidden eras that Disney has to offer with what is on that island right there, or who is singing that beautiful song over there. Disney magic is something that is hidden within the community itself and the environment that surrounds it, rather than just the rides being there for the sake of being there.
So all in all, Disney Genie is not the most effective system that's ever been put in place. In short, it actually creates more headaches by its free system and is only useful for some with Genie Plus. But despite all of its issues, Disneyland still remains to be one of the best places on the entire planet. Despite everything, I still enjoyed my time here, and so did everyone else around. Because no other genius other than Walt Disney was able to see the value of family and friends hanging out in a place together. It's all about this. It's all about the community. And the community is what makes Disneyland special, despite the issues with the entire Walt Disney Company, especially this year in the year of their 100th anniversary. But as long as they continue to keep pricing us out, they will lessen the impact that the magic has. They will no longer be fit to serve this community at all if they want to continue doing the path that they are now. That they do have the tools to make everything the best that they could ever be, by attractions, rides, people, shows, whatever they want, but they just choose not to. They just choose it for a select few to save some money and to push some message that isn't quite working just as well as they hoped for. But it is with that hope that better things can come from this, that you can be informed to make the right decision, that none of this needs to actually happen in the first place, when before they actually had free systems that everyone could use. But with that, I sadly have to resign and say Genie Plus and this entire system, the paid FastPass system, will not go away at all. Because Disney Parks is one of the biggest parks of the Walt Disney Company and still increases in revenue, which is of course thanks to Genie in that part as well, which they won't stop and they won't remove that if the potential for revenue actually decreases. And if that happens, then what are they going to do? Of course, the other alternative is the simplest answer: to make good stories, and people will come. People will come if you give them value. And this is not the value that the people actually need.
And that's all they really need to do. Every solution to the problems we have now are literally right within their own history when we heed the actual philosophy of Walt and everyone else who actually learned under him. Now, this doesn't mean we should constantly hail him as a messiah for starting Disney to being the empire it is now, because of the fact he still was a man with his own faults as anyone else, but just more for the idea of what he brought into the world and what people actually took to heart. The one that most of us know exists today because of what we rely within our own hearts and minds. The experiences we cherish together because that's what Disney is. The fact that we can hang out together and have a good time. That we can actually do better and try to change things the way that we should see fit, as all of these experiences are for us mainly and not just there for the sake of it being there as a business. Disneyland and Disney Parks are a true dedication of what human achievement could really be and what could be done in a positive impact to all of our societies, where its brightest days are truly ahead of it, and one I cannot wait to be a part of in the future. Because if you know me, then you know my dreams and aspirations is to become the future CEO of the Walt Disney Company itself, where I do this because I just really care too much and really want them to succeed with the environments that are welcome to all of mankind and the world as a whole. That in this crazy place that we call life, we have the ability to create the impossible and further our own understanding of each other for peace and goodwill and the ultimate meaning that we are actually here for. Just as I said in my last videos, I will never stop loving this place because it is what makes me me, and I will continue to do so until the day I die and everyone else on this planet gets that great experience that welcomes everyone without a price tag delivered onto it at all. So with that, I really hope that what I showed you was super informative to a decision to change Disney for the better as we enter the 2nd century, and of course for you to enjoy your time at the places we love, because just as Walt said, Disneyland is in fact your land and you should make the best out of it.
And as you can see behind me, so many people always will and always will want to experience such magic, and so will I. So with that said, I'm going to Fantasyland. I'm all done, so goodbye.
Lots of things I've started, and if I just felt it wasn't natural, if it's not too deep, I abandoned the thing and started something else. You can tell when it's wrong, you know.
Where did you originally get the first notion to do that?
Well, it came about when my daughters were very young, and Saturday was always Daddy's Day with the 2 daughters. So we'd start out and try to go someplace with, different things, and I would take them to the merry-go-round, and I took them different places, and as I'd sit there while they rode the merry-go-round, did all these things, sit on a bench, eating peanuts, I felt that there should be something built, some kind of an amusement enterprise built where that the parents and the children could have fun together. So that's how Disneyland started. Well, it took many years. It was a whole period of maybe 15 years developing. Started with many ideas, threw them away, started all over again. And eventually it evolved into what you see today as Disneyland. But it all started from a daddy with 2 daughters wondering where he could take them, where he could have a little fun with them too.
There's certainly a completely unique reward in having that feeling about your work and what you've accomplished.
Well, of course, happiness is a state of mind. That you can, if it's of your own doing, you can be happy or you can be unhappy. It's just according to the way you look at things, So I think happiness is, contentment, but it doesn't mean you have to have wealth, But all individuals are different. Some of us wouldn't be satisfied with just carrying out a routine job and being happy. Yet I envy those people. I had a brother who I really envied because He was a mailman, but he had all the fun. He had himself a trailer, and he used to go off and go fishing, and he didn't worry about payrolls and stories and picture grosses or anything. And he was the happy one. I always said, he's the smart Disney.
Well, as you can see, the past year has been a big one for us. It gave us a good start into Disneyland's second decade. But even now, we're thinking ahead and creating new attractions for months and years to come. And speaking of the very near future, we'll be back in 1 minute to tell you about our next program.
Thank you guys for watching this video on Disney's Genie. I worked a very long time on this video because I wanted to do something else for my channel. I know most of the times I do videos on Disney animated films and that's the one that gets a lot of views, but I wanted to differentiate my channel ever since I did that downfall video a while back, where I went on my first trip to Disneyland and I couldn't stop thinking about what can I do when I went back, because I went on a few trips here and there, and I just wanted to do something else, and of course I just wanted to do an excuse to go back to Disneyland because I always loved that place. It's one of my most favorite places in the world and I really love that and wanted to do another video on it, and knew that there was problems I knew when I went back to Disney about Genie that I saw the first time I tripped, so I wanted to do a full video on that. Because of the fact I was so used to FastPass and the MaxPass system beforehand, and then COVID hit, and my problem with the executive department of Disney kind of made me want to actually go a little bit in depth in using this system. It's not the most those other videos I've been inspired by, like Defunctland's video on FastPass, where he goes into the nitty-gritty of the system, but it's more about what a singular person like me would experience with the Disney Genie system as you see here right now. I do hope you enjoy this because it's a very different take than my normal videos, and I love working on this, and I hope this serves as an avenue to create more videos around Disney parks, which I really love to do. After all, most of my channel is based around Disneyland, Disney in general, and I just wanted to do something a little bit different in that regard. And I hope to do it I hope to go to Disney World and Disneyland Paris, Hong Kong Disneyland, Shanghai Disneyland, Tokyo Disney, all of those parks, because I really am a fan of that too, and I never got to experience that. So hopefully in the future I can do more of those videos because I'm excited by the possibility of what I can do with that as well. And for those of you who are wondering, well, this is the video I've been working on for a long time, why I've been a little bit silent lately, because I wanted to do something different, and I hope this suffices. Other than that, I will actually go back to do my normal videos animated films like Disney, probably some DreamWorks here and there like I always plan. I will always focus on other animated movies or movies in general that interest me, but I just realized in this year, of course being the 100th anniversary of the Walt Disney Company here in 2023 still, as of this recording, it's just become more important to who I am as a Disney fan and what my ultimate goals in life were to be, who my, hero is, Walt Disney himself. And I just wanted to do something different in regards to that instead of my normal content. And I want to do even more with that. I want to do a lot more with Disney than Disney could ever do because I just really care. It's just, one hopeful man's way of trying to actually make something better for a change so that he could probably, of course, like he said before, become the CEO of the Walt Disney Company, if that's possible. Hopefully I could change that in some way, and hopefully this channel and you guys actually enjoying that can actually create that change for a positive in the future. Well, I shouldn't waste any more of your time. I just wanted to say I hope you enjoyed this video and hope for more videos like this in the future, as this was the most exciting and the most passionate I've ever been and put into a video.
It was a lot of work and it took lots of months, and I thank you all for your support over this year, as this was the most insane year I've ever experienced on YouTube. I've never thought I would get this far at all, from 0 up to like almost 50,000 at this point. Well, thank you very much, and of course, because of that obligation, I hope you like this video and subscribe if you want to see more like this. And with that all out of the way, thank you again. I'm all done, so goodbye.